Suffering is something we all know, even if we don't always name it as such. It's in the weight of a sleepless night, in the aching silence after a loved one's departure, or the knot in your chest when things fall apart. No one escapes it, not the rich, not the wise, not even the saints. But what if suffering wasn't the enemy we think it is? What if it's not just something to endure, but something that teaches? In the heart of Buddhism, suffering isn't a punishment or a flaw to be hidden. It's a doorway, a teacher, a quiet, insistent invitation to turn inward and listen more closely to life. This journey we're about to take is one of compassion, one of stories passed down through centuries. Tales of monks, mothers, kings, beggars, and everyday people who discovered deep rest and awakening, not in spite of their suffering, but through it. And as you listen, gently, with a heart open to receive, you might find your own rest unfolding too. The Buddha's teachings begin not with grand cosmic mysteries, but with something deeply familiar, the truth of suffering. Known as the first noble truth, dukkha or suffering is not merely pain, but a restlessness of heart, a deep sense that something is off. It includes physical pain, yes, but also the suffering of change, the unease of craving, the sorrow of loss. To live is to brush against it daily. But here's the thing, the Buddha didn't stop at naming suffering. He illuminated its causes, and more importantly, its end. Why do we suffer? We suffer because we cling. We hold tightly to what we want, and we push away what we don't. We resist the impermanence of all things. But in doing so, we miss the chance to soften, to grow, to wake up. Buddhism teaches that suffering, when met with wisdom and compassion, becomes a bridge, not a wall. Compassion, or karuna, is not just an emotion. It's an action, a force, a way of living that sees the pain of others and does not turn away. It's not about fixing everything, or even understanding everything. It's about presence. When we meet our own pain with compassion, something tender opens. We stop fighting the wave and begin to float with it. In Buddhist practice, compassion begins with ourselves. Self-compassion isn't indulgence. It's not weakness. It's the radical recognition that we too are worthy of gentleness. When we give ourselves that grace, something in us softens enough to extend it to others. The tight knot of the ego begins to loosen. Let me tell you a story, one that has echoed across centuries. There once was a woman named Kisa Gotami. Her child, her only child, died suddenly. Consumed with grief, she wandered from house to house, pleading, "Please, give me medicine to bring my son back." Most turned her away. Some pitied her, but none could help. Finally, she was told, "Go to the Buddha. He may know what to do." She went to him, her eyes wild with sorrow. "Please, my son, help me bring him back." The Buddha looked at her and said, "Bring me a mustard seed from a home that has never known death." With hope rekindled, she ran from door to door asking each family. But every home had a story. A grandfather lost, a mother buried, a child mourned. By the end of the day, she realized death is not personal, it is universal. Her suffering was not isolated, it was shared. She returned to the Buddha with empty hands but a full heart. And there, in the presence of that truth, her grief began to soften. She laid her child to rest, not just physically, but within herself. What does this story show us? That even in the deepest grief, we are not alone. That suffering connects us, breaks down the illusion of separateness. And when we meet that suffering, not with judgment, not with panic, but with compassion, we begin to rest, not because the pain is gone, but because we're no longer resisting it. As you settle into this journey, let these stories cradle you. Let the teachings be a balm, not just for the mind, but for the weary places within you. You don't need to solve everything right now. You don't need to figure it all out. Just be here. Just listen. Suffering has a voice, and when we truly hear it, we find that it is not shouting. It is whispering, "Wake up. Rest here. There is a certain quiet wisdom in the way Buddhist teachings describe suffering. It's not a punishment or a curse, nor is it something to be ashamed of. Instead, it is viewed as an inevitable part of our human experience, something that arises simply because we are alive, because we feel, because we care. The Buddha described three main kinds of suffering. The first is the obvious pain, illness, aging, death. The second is the suffering that comes with change. Even joyful things like love or success are tinged with anxiety, because deep down we know they won't last. And the third kind is the most subtle, the suffering of conditioned existence, the quiet restlessness that never fully goes away, even when everything seems perfect. It's easy to think we can outrun these kinds of suffering. We try to plan, to perfect, to control. But life, by its nature, defies that control. Everything we hold on to, our health, our relationships, our achievements, is subject to change. No matter how hard we try to cling, things shift. And in that shifting, we often feel the sting of loss. But Buddhism doesn't ask us to run from this. It invites us to sit with it, to see clearly. And in seeing clearly, we discover a different kind of peace. One not based on avoiding suffering, but on understanding it. There's a story that speaks beautifully to this. A young monk, still new in his practice, had only one possession he truly cherished: a ceramic bowl. It was simple, handmade, given to him by his teacher when he first entered the monastery. Every morning, he used it to collect food during alms rounds, and every evening, he washed it with care. Over time, that bowl became more than a tool. It was a symbol of his discipline, his identity, his devotion. One morning, as he returned to the monastery, his sleeve brushed the edge of the bowl. It slipped from his hands and shattered on the stone path. In that moment, he froze, staring at the shards, feeling a rush of panic, then grief. A part of him felt broken too. He sat beside the pieces for a long time. Eventually, his teacher approached and knelt beside him. Without speaking, the teacher gently picked up one of the fragments, holding it in his palm. Then he said, "Do you remember what I told you when I gave you this bowl?" The monk shook his head. "I told you," the teacher said, "this bowl is already broken." At first, the young monk didn't understand, but over time he began to see. Nothing we hold can stay whole forever. Not objects, not bodies, not even moments. And if we live as though they can, we suffer twice, once when we fear their loss, and again when the loss comes. To see the bowl as already broken isn't to be pessimistic, it's to be free. Free from the illusion that we can hold on to what must change. It's not that we stop loving the bowl. It's that we love it more fully, knowing we can't keep it forever. This teaching, though simple, touches something deep. How often do we suffer not because something ended, but because we believed it wouldn't? How often do we fight the truth of impermanence instead of learning to dance with it? Another story takes us to a small village where a humble farmer lived with his family. One year his horse ran away. The neighbors said, "What bad luck?" But the farmer simply replied, "Maybe." The next week the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. "What good luck?" the neighbors exclaimed. Again the farmer said, "Maybe." His son tried to tame one of the wild horses, but he was thrown and broke his leg. "What bad luck?" they said. The farmer, still maybe. Soon after, the army came to the village, conscripting young men for war. When they saw the son's broken leg, they passed him over. The neighbors once more said, "What good luck?" And again, the farmer said, "Maybe." This story reminds us that we see so little of the whole picture. What feels like loss today may become a gift tomorrow, and what seems like a blessing may carry hardship we cannot yet imagine. Suffering often arises not from events themselves, but from our insistence on labeling them. This is bad, that is good. But life doesn't operate in such clear lines. When we soften our grip on judgment, we soften our suffering. Then there's the story of a woman known for her extraordinary patience. Her husband was quick-tempered, harsh with words, and often unkind. Yet she responded not with resentment, but with quiet strength. Each time he shouted, she listened. Each time he insulted her, she met him with stillness. People asked her, "Why don't you fight back? Why do you stay so calm?" She replied, "If someone offers me a gift and I don't accept it, to whom does it belong?" They said, "To the one who offered it." She smiled. "Exactly. His anger is his gift. I choose not to accept it." Her patience wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. She didn't suppress her feelings, nor did she excuse his behavior. But she chose where to place her attention. She chose not to take in poison that wasn't hers. This is the power of mindfulness. The ability to see what arises, to feel it fully, and then to respond, not react. In that pause, that space between stimulus and response, we find our freedom. And in all these stories, in the monk and his bowl, the farmer and his horse, the woman and her patience, we see the same thread. Suffering arises, yes, but how we meet it changes everything. Whether we grasp or let go, whether we judge or accept, whether we harden or soften, these choices shape our experience. So let's pause here. Let these stories settle into your breath. Maybe you've been the young monk, watching something precious fall apart. Maybe you've been the farmer, trying to make sense of change. Maybe you've been the woman, quietly holding your ground in the storm of someone else's rage. Whatever you've carried, however your suffering has appeared, know this: you are not alone. These stories are not just teachings. They are reflections. They are companions. They are soft lanterns lighting the path toward rest. In Buddhism, suffering isn't a mistake. It's not a flaw in the system. It's the very thing that nudges us awake. The Buddha himself was born into a world of luxury. As a young prince, shielded from pain, he knew only comfort and ease. But the illusion broke when he stepped outside his palace walls and saw, for the first time, sickness, aging, and death. That shock, that rupture in his perfect world, didn't lead him to despair. It led him to a question. Why do we suffer, and is there a way beyond it? He left everything behind: his home, his status, his family. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree and vowed not to rise until he understood the truth. And what he discovered wasn't an escape from suffering, but a way through it. Suffering, he saw, is our teacher. When we stop resisting it, when we turn toward it with presence and compassion, it reveals the conditions of our mind. It shows us where we cling, where we fear, where we hide, and it invites us to let go little by little. One of the most powerful examples of this transformation is the story of Angulimala. His name means garland of fingers, a chilling title that points to the life he once led. He was feared across the land, a bandit who lived in the forest and collected the fingers of those he killed, stringing them around his neck as trophies. His reputation struck terror into villages. No one dared approach him. But what drove a man to such darkness? Angulimala had once been a brilliant student, deeply devoted to his teacher, yet jealousy twisted the path. Others envied his closeness to the teacher and began whispering lies. Slowly, his teacher turned against him, ordering him to commit one final act to prove his loyalty, to kill 1,000 people. Angulimala, confused, heartbroken, and desperate for approval, obeyed, and so he killed, one by one, until the number stood at 999. He waited for the final victim. Then came the Buddha. As the story goes, Angulimala saw the Buddha walking through the forest, calm, deliberate, utterly unafraid. Angulimala, sensing his last chance, rushed toward him. But no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't catch up. The Buddha walked at a gentle pace, yet remained ahead. Frustrated, Angulimala shouted, "Stop, monk." The Buddha replied, without turning, "I have stopped, Angulimala. It is you who must stop." Those words struck something deep in him. Stunned, he asked, "What do you mean?" "You're still walking. The Buddha turned to him then and said, "I have stopped chasing craving, hatred and delusion. You are still running with them." In that moment, something cracked open in Angulimala. He dropped his weapons. He knelt, and he asked to follow the Buddha. Many doubted this transformation. Even after he became a monk, people recoiled at his presence, but the Buddha welcomed him. He gave him robes, a bowl, a place among the Sangha. Angulimala didn't erase his past. He carried it, but he carried it with awareness, and in doing so, he found peace. Once, while begging for alms, he saw a woman writhing in pain, struggling to give birth. She was terrified, weak, and alone. Angulimala rushed back to the Buddha and asked how he could help. The Buddha instructed him, "Go to her and say, 'Since the day I took up the path of harmlessness, I have not knowingly harmed a single being. By this truth, may you and your child be well.'" Angulimala hesitated. He remembered his past, but the Buddha reminded him, "The truth lies in the present." So he went. He spoke those words, and according to the story, the woman's pain eased. Her child was born safely. This story isn't about forgetting what we've done. It's about the radical possibility of redemption. Even the most hardened heart, when touched by insight and compassion, can change. Suffering cracked Angulimala open, but it was compassion that transformed him. Another story unfolds not in violence but in tenderness. In a quiet grove near the monastery, a horse lay dying. It belonged to no one, or perhaps it belonged to everyone. It had once pulled carts, helped till the land, carried supplies for the Sangha. Now, old and thin, its body trembled in the grass. Some passed by and shook their heads. "Such is the way of things," they said. "Everything ages, everything dies." But one monk, seeing the horse, stopped. He knelt beside it, placed a cloth beneath its head, brought it water, stroked its face with gentle hands. He stayed there for hours, not to change the outcome, but to be present in the final moments. Another monk asked him later, "Why did you waste time on that dying animal?" The monk replied, "It wasn't a waste. I gave the horse what we all long for at the end: presence, kindness, dignity." Sometimes compassion isn't about solving or saving, it's about staying, about sitting beside pain and saying, "You are not alone." The Buddha once showed this in a way that left an imprint on the Sangha forever. A monk had fallen ill, so ill that he could no longer care for himself. His robes were soiled, his bedding damp, flies gathered near him. Others, busy with their duties, avoided his hut. One morning the Buddha entered that hut. Without a word, he brought clean water, bathed the monk's body, changed his bedding. He wiped the monk's face, smoothed his brow. Then he turned to the Sangha and said, "You have no mother or father now to care for you. If you do not care for one another, who will?" This is the heart of compassion, not abstract philosophy, not lofty words, attention. Care. Suffering is not always dramatic. It can be quiet, hidden behind closed doors, beneath the surface of a smile. But when we pause to see it, truly see it, it changes us. It softens the hard shell around our hearts. It reminds us that we too will age. We too will falter. And in that understanding, we begin to move differently, speak differently, live differently. So what has suffering taught us so far? That impermanence isn't our enemy, it's the truth of life. That even the darkest path can be walked toward light. That dignity lies not just in joy, but in how we respond to pain. Let these stories settle in your breath. Let them ripple into the quiet spaces inside you. You don't have to force anything. Just stay. Just breathe. The teacher is here, not outside, but within the very things you wish to escape. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come from silence or stillness, but from insight. A deep, internal knowing that things are unfolding exactly as they must. In Buddhism, this peace is known not just as rest for the body, but as rest for the heart and mind. It isn't about escaping life's challenges. It's about entering them more fully, more gently, more clearly. And through this deeper understanding, we begin to discover what the Buddha called deep rest. It's easy to think of rest as merely physical. A quiet room, a soft bed, a few hours of sleep. And yes, those are important. But Buddhist deep rest touches something subtler. It's the rest that arises when we stop pushing against what is. It's the calm that dawns when we stop trying to fix, control, or deny the present moment. Deep rest is the release of resistance. Think of a leaf floating downstream. It doesn't try to swim. It moves with the current, surrendering to the flow. This doesn't mean it's passive. It simply trusts the movement of the water. In the same way, when we let go of clinging and aversion, we rest. Not in resignation, but in understanding. One story captures this beautifully. In a remote forest far from any village, lived a monk known only by his silence. He spoke rarely, and when he did, it was only in answer to direct questions. Most of his life was spent in meditation beneath the great fig trees, where birds and insects were his only company. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in gold, the monk sat still, breathing softly. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the forest. From the shadows emerged a tiger, its eyes bright, body lean with hunger. The monk did not move. The tiger stepped closer, circling him slowly. Its breath was heavy, its gaze sharp. Still, the monk did not rise or run. He simply bowed his head gently, acknowledging the tiger's presence with respect. Moments passed. Then, as if sensing something it couldn't understand, the tiger let out a final growl and vanished into the trees. Later, another monk asked him, "Weren't you afraid?" The silent monk replied, "Of course. But fear is not a reason to run. Fear is a bell, letting me know I'm still attached to life." I heard the bell, and I listened. Then I returned to my breath. This is deep rest, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to be ruled by it. When we face what terrifies us with calm awareness, we shift from panic to presence. There's another tale, much quieter, that speaks to a different kind of rest. The rest found in humility. In a village nestled at the foot of the mountains, an old woman lived alone. She was poor, with only a single straw mat for sleeping and a worn robe passed down from her mother. Every morning, she swept the temple steps with care. She had no title, no teachings to offer, no wealth to share. But those who watched her began to notice something unusual. She never hurried. She never complained. Her gaze was soft, her hands steady. Her smile, when it came, seemed to linger in the air like incense. One day, a scholar visited the temple. He had traveled far, seeking wisdom. When he saw the old woman sweeping, he assumed she was just a servant and ignored her. He approached the abbot and asked, "Who here can teach me the deepest truths?" The abbot pointed toward the woman and said, "Ask her." The scholar was confused but obeyed. He went to her and asked, "What is the nature of enlightenment?" She looked up, placed the broom aside and said, "When I sweep, I sweep. When I rest, I rest." The scholar waited for more, but that was all. And in time, as he observed her, he began to see her peace didn't come from knowing great teachings. It came from embodying them. To sweep with attention, to rest without guilt, to live without chasing. That is deep rest. Another story offers a different window. In a neighboring village, a child lived with her grandmother in a small, quiet home. One day the grandmother fell ill, her breath shallow, her eyes dim. The doctors said there was nothing more to do. The child, only 7 years old, sat beside her, holding her hand. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She simply stayed. When the grandmother stirred and asked, "Aren't you scared?" the child whispered, "No, I'm loving you." And she did. Through the long night, through the ragged breathing, through the final stillness, she stayed. This too is deep rest. Not just for the one dying, but for the one staying. When we release the urge to flee discomfort, when we hold another through their pain, our presence becomes a balm. We often think of compassion as doing, but sometimes compassion is simply being there, being quiet, being kind. When you allow suffering to be just what it is, not denying it, not dramatizing it, you make room for something else to arise, tenderness. But tenderness is not weakness. It is the soil in which deep rest grows. And sometimes it begins with the smallest shift. The next time you feel discomfort, emotional, physical, mental, try this pause, breathe, place a gentle hand over your heart, whisper inwardly, this too belongs. It may not change the pain, but it changes your relationship to it. And that is the essence of rest, not escaping the storm, but remembering you are the sky in which the storm passes. Compassion softens the edges of suffering. It doesn't erase hardship, but it removes the loneliness of it. In the presence of compassion, we no longer feel exiled from the world. Instead, we feel held. So now, as you take a breath, let these stories settle. A monk and a tiger sharing silence beneath the trees. An old woman sweeping, not for recognition, but for love. A child holding the hand of someone leaving this world. None of them sought peace. They simply showed up to life, just as it was. And in doing so, they discovered the stillness that was always waiting underneath. That stillness is yours too. It's not far away. It lives in the next breath, and the next, and the next. And as you breathe, as you listen, as you soften, something within you begins to rest. There's a certain kind of transformation that only suffering can bring about. Not the kind that's flashy or immediate, but slow, quiet, and deep, like roots growing in the dark. Suffering has a way of burning away what isn't essential, and in that fire, something new begins to take shape. Something softer, something wiser, something more alive. The warrior had always believed strength came from dominance. He trained from a young age, mastering weapons, perfecting forms, learning strategy. He was fearless in battle, praised for his victories, respected by rulers. But inside, something was unraveling. With each battle, he felt a weight settle deeper in his chest, a heaviness he couldn't name. One day, after a particularly brutal conflict, he stood over a field strewn with bodies, men, boys, horses. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the broken earth. And in that golden silence, he wept, not because he had lost, not because he was wounded, but because he saw clearly for the first time what he had become. In the stillness of that moment, he dropped his sword and vowed never to raise it again. He wandered for years, seeking not a new master, but a new way of being. Eventually, he found his way to a monastery, where he asked the abbot, "Can one who has caused harm find peace?" The abbot didn't speak right away. He simply poured tea, handed him a cup, and said, "It's not about forgetting, it's about awakening." That night, the warrior sat beneath a tree and listened to the wind move through the leaves. He had no answers, only breath, but in that breath, he found a kind of beginning. Suffering had opened a door, and through that door, compassion entered. Transformation doesn't always look like grand epiphanies. Sometimes, it's as simple as seeing another human being with new eyes. A king once disguised himself to walk among his people. He wanted to understand their lives, not just hear about them through courtiers and messengers. Dressed as a commoner, he wandered the streets, watched the market stalls, listened to the children play. In a narrow alley, he saw a beggar sitting in rags, holding out an empty bowl. The king approached, curious. "Do you not work?" he asked. The beggar looked up, his face lined with age and weather. "I worked for many years," he said. "But age came, illness came. Now I sit." The king sat beside him. At first they said nothing. Then the beggar began to speak about his youth, his joys, his regrets, his losses. Hours passed. When the king finally stood to leave, he offered a coin. The beggar smiled and said, "You already gave me more than I expected." You listened. Later, back in his palace, the king couldn't forget that encounter. He realized that in all his wealth and power, He had rarely truly listened. He had issued commands, heard reports, received praise, but he hadn't heard a real story in years. From that day forward, he held weekly gatherings, not to speak, but to listen. He learned that compassion begins not with action, but with presence. To hear someone without judgment is to say, "You matter." In this way, suffering can humanize even the most distant hearts. There is also the story of a dancer, once famed across the land for her beauty and grace. Her movements were poetry, her presence electric. Crowds gathered to see her perform, to watch her body move like wind across silk. But as the years passed, her joints stiffened, her body no longer obeyed her commands. Applause faded, invitations ceased. One evening, she stood alone on the stage of an empty theater and wept. She felt invisible. For months, she did not dance. But slowly, without knowing why, she began to move again. Not for anyone else, not for praise, but for herself. Her movements changed, slower, more deliberate, more internal. She danced in silence, with eyes closed, feeling each motion from the inside. One morning, a monk passed by her open window and saw her. He returned the next day, and the next, just to sit quietly and watch. Finally, he said, "You dance like someone who has listened deeply to sorrow." She opened her eyes and smiled. "Sorrow taught me to be still. Stillness taught me how to move." She no longer performed on stage, but people came to see her, students, wanderers, elders, not for spectacle, but for the feeling of being in the presence of something real. Her suffering had stripped away performance. What remained was essence. Then there was the outcast. In a rigid society where status dictated value, he was marked early, born to a family deemed impure, shunned from schools, barred from temples. Yet he carried within him a heart full of yearning, not for acceptance, but for meaning. He wandered from town to town, doing menial work, always on the outside. One evening, he approached a monastery hoping for shelter. The gatekeeper eyed him warily, but before he could be turned away, a senior monk appeared and said, "Let him in." The outcast entered, eyes wide. During the evening meal, he sat silently. Afterward, he approached the monk and said, "Why did you welcome me?" The monk replied, "Because the one who suffers most often sees most clearly." That night, the outcast sat with the other monks during meditation, and though he felt awkward, uncertain, something inside him quieted. For the first time, he didn't feel outside the circle. In time, he became a monk himself, not the most eloquent, not the most learned, but deeply kind. Others noticed how he listened, how he cared for the sick, how he always offered the last portion of food. Years later, when a novice asked, "How did you become so gentle?" he smiled and said, "Because I know what it's like to be invisible, and I never want anyone else to feel that way." Suffering didn't destroy him, it refined him. All of these stories share a common thread: transformation not through escape, but through turning toward pain. The warrior who laid down his sword, the king who learned to listen, the dancer who moved through silence, the outcast who embraced his worth. Each one discovered something not in spite of their suffering, but because of it. There's a kind of alchemy that happens when we meet pain with presence. It doesn't always feel magical. Often, it feels like grieving, like surrender, like stillness. But slowly, something changes. Grief becomes tenderness, fear becomes courage, shame becomes understanding. And in the place where we once felt broken, something sacred begins to bloom. So let yourself be moved by these stories, not just as tales from the past, but as mirrors. Maybe you've laid down your own sword. Maybe you've sat beside a stranger. Maybe you've danced alone in the dark. Whatever form your suffering has taken, know this: it's not the end. It may be the beginning of something deeper. Let that truth settle in your breath, your body, your awareness. You are not alone in your suffering. You are not alone in your healing. And what you learn through pain, you carry into the world as compassion. In the quiet rhythm of a Buddhist life, compassion is not an occasional act. It is a way of being, a steady thread that weaves through every breath, every gesture, every word. And like suffering, compassion is something we come to understand more deeply through experience. It matures through our willingness to stay close to what hurts, to what challenges us, to what humbles us. Compassion isn't merely about feeling sorry for someone. It's about entering into another's reality with open-hearted presence. And sometimes, that begins in silence. There once lived a monk who took a vow of silence for many years, not out of disdain for speech, but as a way of refining his listening. He lived in a modest dwelling near a grove, offering no teachings, no public talks, no written words. And yet people came. They came not to hear him, but to sit in his presence. There was something about the stillness that emanated from him, something calming, grounding, undeniably compassionate. One day, a woman arrived at his hut. She was trembling, her eyes wet with grief. She had lost her son in a sudden illness and hadn't spoken to anyone since the funeral. The world felt empty to her, cruel and indifferent. She didn't know what she expected by coming. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a place to sit without having to explain. The monk opened the door and gestured for her to come in. He prepared tea, set it before her, and then sat opposite, wordless. She said nothing, he said nothing. The minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, she looked up and whispered. He was only 8. The monk didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't look away. She said, "I'm so tired." Still, no words, and yet something shifted in her. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to make her stay until the tea turned cold, enough to return the next day, and the next. Weeks later, she told someone, "I never said anything, but I felt heard, I felt seen." That is the power of deep listening, the kind of listening that isn't waiting to speak, isn't crafting advice, isn't trying to fix, just being there fully. In that space, something sacred unfolds. Sometimes compassion arrives not in words or insights, but in action. A young novice once tended the monastery's herb garden. One afternoon, while walking the forest trail back from the river, he heard whimpering in the underbrush. Curious, he knelt and found a wounded dog, its paw caught in a hunter's snare. The animal's eyes were wild with pain and fear. The novice reached forward gently, whispering soothing words. Slowly, he loosened the trap and lifted the dog into his arms. He brought it back to the monastery and cared for it, dressing its wounds, feeding it broth, letting it sleep beside his own bed. For weeks, the dog remained at his side. As it healed, it began to follow him, tail wagging, eyes bright. Other monks were uneasy. "It's not proper," they said. "The dog should be outside the gates." But the abbot observed quietly. One day, he said to the novice, "What you've offered that dog, tenderness, consistency, kindness, you must now offer to yourself." The novice bowed, tears in his eyes. Sometimes we think compassion is only for others, but we forget without extending it inward, our well runs dry. When we nurture ourselves with the same gentle care, we become more available to others, not from duty, but from wholeness. And what happens when compassion reaches even the hardest hearts? There's a tale of a prisoner, once a soldier, now serving life for crimes of war. In prison, he carried rage like armor. He was feared, isolated, unrepentant. No one spoke to him unless they had to. One year, as part of a mindfulness outreach program, a Buddhist teacher was invited into the prison. She didn't speak of forgiveness, not at first. She simply taught the prisoners to breathe, to feel their bodies, to notice their thoughts without reacting. The man scoffed. "Breathing won't change what I've done." But she returned week after week. One day, in the middle of a session, his breath caught. A memory surfaced, vivid, sharp, the face of a child he had harmed. He couldn't shake it. That night, he cried for the first time in decades. Eventually, he began to sit alone in his cell, eyes closed, breathing slowly, he started apologizing to the guards, to other inmates, even to himself. And one day he asked the teacher, "Do you think it matters if I change now?" She looked at him and said, "Compassion does not keep score. It only asks you to begin." That's the essence of true compassion. It does not weigh worthiness. It doesn't wait for someone to earn kindness. It meets them exactly where they are. Whether in a prison cell, a quiet room, or a crowded street, compassion moves through us not as obligation, but as truth. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes, it's the smallest gesture that carries the greatest weight. A bowl of rice left at the doorstep, a steady hand during an anxious moment, a shared breath in silence. These are the threads of a compassionate life, unseen by many but deeply felt. And when compassion becomes a way of seeing, a way of being, even our rest deepens, because we're no longer fighting the world, we're holding it, we're holding ourselves. So as you pause now, take a slow breath in, let it out gently, and know every act of compassion, no matter how small, adds light to a world that forgets too easily how to be kind. Let your presence be that light. Let your stillness be that comfort. Let your breath carry tenderness wherever it goes. There's something deeply powerful about being present when someone is in need. Not the grand moments of crisis, but the quiet ones, when the world is still and all that's asked is for you to stay close, to bear witness, to offer warmth, to be there without rushing in to fix. Compassion, at its most refined, often takes the shape of quiet presence, and through that presence, we discover that compassion doesn't deplete us, it deepens us. There was once a healer who traveled from village to village, known not for miraculous cures, but for how she listened. Her hands were gentle, her eyes kind, and her silence somehow said everything. One afternoon she arrived at a home where a man lay in bed, weak from a long illness. The family had done what they could, but the man's spirit had grown thin. He barely spoke, barely ate. They called for the healer not because they expected a cure, but because they didn't know what else to do. She sat beside him, not speaking, just placing her hand lightly on his. The man opened his eyes and whispered, "Why are you here?" She smiled softly and said, "To remind you that you are not alone." She returned every day for a week. Sometimes she read poems aloud. Other times she simply hummed the same quiet melody over and over, like a lullaby from long ago. The man began to respond, not in leaps and bounds, but with small things. A longer gaze, a full breath, a soft thank you. When she left, he said, "You didn't save me, but you helped me rest." And sometimes that's what healing looks like. Not fixing, but resting. Not removing suffering, but softening the edge of it. There was another man, a wandering monk, who once said, "If you cannot ease someone's pain, at least don't make it heavier." He traveled light, with only his robe, a bowl, and a bell. In one village he was met with suspicion. Children mocked him, adults ignored him. Still, every morning he stood beneath the banyan tree and rang his bell 3 times. No one came. Still, he rang it. Eventually someone asked, "Why ring a bell no one answers?" He replied, "It reminds me that my job is to offer, not to demand, not to convince, just to offer." Weeks later, a woman came. Her son had died, and she hadn't spoken to anyone in days. She didn't expect answers, but the sound of the bell had drawn her, softened something inside. She sat beside the monk in silence. When the bell rang again, she said, "I think I can breathe again." That, too, is compassion, steadiness, showing up even when no one seems to notice, holding space even when it feels like no one will enter it. In another monastery, far up in the mountains, a young monk was known for his joy. He smiled easily, laughed often, and always found time to help others. But inside, he carried a sorrow no one could see. Years earlier, he had watched his sister die in a house fire, unable to save her. That memory clung to him, not with sharp pain, but with a dull ache that never left. One day, while meditating in the courtyard, a tear slipped down his cheek. An elder monk saw it and quietly sat beside him. No words, no questions. Eventually, the younger monk whispered, "I thought I had let it go." The elder replied, "Grief isn't something we finish. It becomes part of the rhythm of our breath." And with that, the younger monk rested his head on the elder's shoulder and wept. Not out of despair, but from the relief of being held. Even monks suffer. Even those who chant, who bow, who teach, they carry loss just like anyone else. And it is in acknowledging this shared humanity that compassion takes root. Not as pity, but as kinship. There's a phrase in the Buddhist tradition: when one suffers, all suffer. When one heals, all are healed. This isn't metaphor. It's recognition of the interconnectedness that binds us. The wound of one touches the lives of many, and likewise, the healing of one radiates outward. So how do we live this truth? Perhaps by slowing down, by noticing the person in front of us, by offering our presence, even when we have no words, by forgiving ourselves for the moments we didn't know how to help, and by remembering that the heart has its own wisdom. It knows how to stay soft, even when the world feels sharp. It knows how to return, again and again, to compassion. There was once a teacher who told his students, compassion is not a skill to master. It's a doorway you keep walking through. Some days, it's wide open. Other days, you might need to knock. But it's always there, waiting for you. And every time you enter it, you become a little more whole. So breathe in now. Let your shoulders drop. Let the stories settle. Remember that compassion lives not just in grand gestures, but in the pauses between them. In the hand resting gently on another. In the voice that speaks gently or not at all. In the choice to stay, to bear witness, to love anyway. Let yourself rest in that truth. Let yourself be held by it. And in turn, offer that rest to the world. Sometimes, to understand the power of compassion, we must revisit the simplest of moments, the ones that go unnoticed by the world, but leave an imprint on a single life. And when we begin to see how suffering softens into kindness, how pain opens a door to presence, we realize that the quiet acts of care are not small. They are the shape of healing itself. There once lived a boy whose laughter filled the streets of his village. He was young, no older than 10, with bright eyes and a spirit unburdened by the heaviness of the world. Each morning, he helped his grandmother sweep the stone walkway outside their hut. One day, as they worked together, they saw a neighbor sitting on the ground, her head in her hands. Her husband had fallen ill, and she had no one to help her care for him. The boy let go of his broom. Without being asked, he walked over, sat beside her, and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. She looked up, startled. He said only, "You looked lonely." That evening, she told others in the village, "A child brought me more comfort than all the advice I've been given." And that's often how compassion works. Not with cleverness, not with the right words, but with the courage to show up. When we're young, we do this naturally. Children don't need to be taught how to notice suffering. They just need space to respond to it. A scraped knee, a tearful friend, a frightened animal, they move toward pain without fear, without hesitation. Over time, though, we learn to look away. We convince ourselves that we need answers, that we must fix something to be helpful. But the deepest help often comes not from solutions, but from solidarity. There was an old monk, nearing the end of his life, who once said, "My greatest regret is not that I could not heal every wound, but that I sometimes turned away from them." He had spent his years tending to the sick, guiding the lost, listening to the grieving, but he remembered a time early in his path when a fellow monk collapsed during a long pilgrimage. Weary, overwhelmed, and unsure, he had kept walking. "I told myself I didn't know what to do," he said, "but really I was afraid. Later, when he returned and found his friend had been carried by others to shelter, the guilt stayed with him, not because he hadn't saved him, but because he hadn't tried. That memory stayed etched in his practice. It became the root of his tenderness. For sometimes, it is our missteps that teach us the most about compassion, not just how to offer it, but how to receive it. And when we receive compassion, something within us softens. The tension we didn't know we were holding begins to loosen. The armor around the heart grows lighter. There's a story from a rural monastery where an elderly woman came each day to offer food to the monks. She wasn't wealthy, and her offerings were modest. Small bowls of rice, boiled greens, once a handful of berries. But every dish was prepared with care. She placed each meal in the alms bowls with both hands, eyes lowered in reverence. One day, a visiting monk asked, "Why do you give every day, even when you have so little?" She looked up and said, "Because giving feeds me too." That evening, the monk wrote in his journal, "Compassion is not just what we offer others. It's the way we nourish our own soul." And perhaps that's the truth at the heart of all these stories, that compassion is a circle. What we give, we receive. What we tend to in others begins to blossom in us. And when we forget how to be kind to ourselves, others remind us. There was a teacher who often asked his students at the end of meditation, "What part of you needs forgiveness today?" And then, "Can you offer it?" At first, many found it difficult. They were quick to offer forgiveness to others, but themselves, that took time. Still, over weeks and months, the question began to settle in, and something changed. There was a gentleness in the way they sat, a softness in the way they bowed, a warmth in their voices when they spoke to themselves. Because self-compassion is not self-indulgence. It's the recognition that we, too, are worthy of kindness, that our wounds, like anyone else's, deserve tending. And when we see ourselves clearly, when we stop hiding our pain or denying our sorrow, we make space for healing to begin, not by fixing everything, but by saying, "I see you, I'm here, let's rest together." That's what compassion does. It sits beside the wounded part of you without rushing it. It waits, it listens, it breathes with you. And over time, it teaches you how to do the same for others. So take a breath now. Let it be slow. Feel how your body responds to softness. Let your shoulders drop, your jaw relax, your chest open just a little more. This is compassion in motion. This is the beginning of rest. Not the rest that comes from sleep alone, but the deeper kind. The one that arrives when we are no longer hiding, no longer bracing, no longer running. You don't need to be perfect to be kind. You don't need to be healed to be helpful. You just need to be present. And let the stories that live within you unfold just as they are, unfinished, tender, true. The rhythm of a compassionate life is often steady, quiet, and unnoticed by most. But in that quiet, something luminous begins to grow. It's not about performing goodness or achieving virtue. It's about meeting each moment, especially the difficult ones, with an open heart, a soft gaze, and a willingness to stay present. And when that presence touches the lives of others, we begin to see how compassion, even in its smallest form, has the power to awaken something sacred within us all. A woman once arrived at a monastery's gate just before dusk. Her clothes were dusty from travel, and her eyes held the tired look of someone who'd carried too much for too long. She had no offerings, no robes, no knowledge of chants or rituals. All she had was a question. She bowed to the elder sitting near the gate and said, "I have no peace. May I sit here anyway?" The elder smiled and gestured for her to come inside. She sat beneath a tree, watching the sky shift from gold to grey. Monks passed by with their evening bowls. No one spoke, but no one looked away either. She closed her eyes, listened to the wind, and for the first time in weeks, felt her breath soften. Later, she whispered, "I didn't think it was allowed to rest without earning it." The elder, hearing her words, replied gently, "Rest is not a reward. It is a right. In a world where we are often taught to prove our worth through effort, this kind of compassion can feel radical. It reminds us that we don't have to be fixed to be welcomed. We don't have to be wise to be held. Even in exhaustion, we are still enough." There was once a monk tasked with sweeping the outer grounds of the temple. It was quiet work, often done before sunrise, and few noticed it. He swept slowly, deliberately, as if each motion was a prayer. One morning, a novice asked him, "Why do you sweep every day? The dust always returns." The monk paused, smiled, and said, "Because the act of sweeping clears more than the ground. It clears the mind." This same monk was known to sit for long hours with the elderly in the infirmary, offering nothing more than a warm cloth and gentle presence. When asked why he did it, he answered, "Because one day I'll need someone to do the same for me, and I want to learn how to receive by learning how to give." These acts of compassion aren't dramatic. They don't make headlines, but they create ripples in the heart. A cloth folded gently, a bowl placed mindfully, a gaze that says, "I see you." These are the gestures that shape a life of deep rest. One day, a visitor arrived at the temple, carrying a heavy satchel and a heavier expression. He had traveled a long way, seeking relief from grief he couldn't name. During his stay, he joined the monks for daily rituals, shared in the silent meals, walked slowly through the shaded paths. He noticed how the monks moved, not rushed, not rigid, but with a kind of attentive ease. He asked one of them, "Don't you ever get tired of all this repetition?" The monk answered, "We don't do it because it's different every day. We do it because we are different every day, and the practice meets us where we are." That simple truth stayed with the man long after he left. He returned home not with answers, but with a new kind of attention. He began to water his garden more slowly. He listened more fully to his children. He even paused before speaking, just to notice the space between his thoughts. This is how compassion moves, not as a wave crashing down, but as a tide quietly shaping the shore. Another story tells of a young monk who volunteered to sit vigil with the body of an elder who had passed away. In their tradition, the body was watched over for a full day and night, not because of fear or superstition, but as an act of honor. The room was lit with a single candle. The monk sat quietly, breathing, watching the flame. At one point, he whispered, "Thank you for your silence." Later, when asked what he meant, he said, "In his silence, I heard something I'd never heard before, a kind of presence that didn't need words. It reminded me that even after death, we can still be in relationship, that compassion doesn't end, it just changes form." These are the stories that live not in textbooks, but in hearts. They are passed from teacher to student, from friend to friend, not as instruction but as invitation, to slow down, to listen, to hold gently what is fragile in others and in ourselves. And perhaps the greatest act of compassion is this: to meet each day with a willingness to stay open, to not shut down even when it hurts, to let the tender parts of ourselves remain visible even when the world tells us to hide them. Because when we remain open, we give others permission to do the same. So as you breathe now, notice what arises. Perhaps there's a tightness, a longing. Offer it your attention, not to fix it, but to simply be with it. Breathe in, breathe out. Let this be your compassion. Not reaching outward, not trying to change the world in this moment, just being with what is. Because sometimes, the most profound healing begins not with action, but with presence. Let that presence grow. Let it become a light that guides you back to yourself. And when you're ready, carry that light into the lives of others, quietly, steadily, one breath at a time. In the heart of Buddhist teachings lies a profound truth. Suffering is not merely an obstacle to avoid or overcome, but a profound teacher that opens the door to compassion and wisdom. As we walk this path together, listening to stories born from centuries of human experience, we begin to see that suffering, while often painful, is also a bridge. It connects us to one another in our shared vulnerability and invites us to rest deeply within ourselves. Consider the story of a mother who lost her child unexpectedly. Her grief was so immense, she felt utterly alone, swallowed by a darkness that seemed endless. Desperate, she went from house to house seeking help, clutching a tiny mustard seed, hoping it would magically bring her son back to life. The Buddha told her to find a mustard seed from a home untouched by death. But no matter where she went, every family had known loss. Through this realization, she understood the universality of suffering, that pain is not a personal punishment, but part of life itself. This truth became the seed from which her compassion grew, softening her grief into a quiet strength that allowed her to carry on. Suffering like hers teaches us that we are never truly isolated. It reminds us that compassion begins with recognizing our shared humanity, and that by embracing our pain, we open ourselves to deeper understanding and connection. Then there is the tale of Angulimala, once a feared bandit who wore a garland of fingers taken from his victims. His life was marked by violence and fear, but when he encountered the Buddha, something shifted. The Buddha's calm presence and refusal to react with anger invited Angulimala to stop running from others and from himself. Through compassionate guidance and his own awakening, Angulimala transformed, becoming a monk known for his gentle heart and remorseful wisdom. His story shows us that no matter how far we have strayed, suffering can be the catalyst for redemption. It teaches us that compassion is not reserved for the pure or perfect, but is a path open to all, inviting us to embrace change and healing with humility. In a quiet forest, a monk once faced a tiger in a moment that could have been terrifying. Instead of fleeing or fighting, the monk bowed his head in respect and met the creature's gaze with presence and calm. The tiger, sensing no threat, retreated peacefully. This encounter teaches us that deep rest and freedom come not from avoiding fear, but from facing it with mindful awareness and compassion. For ourselves and all beings, this same mindful compassion reveals itself in the simple acts of an old woman sweeping temple steps or a child caring for a sick grandmother. These quiet gestures, free from expectation or reward, carry profound wisdom about patience, presence, and unconditional love. They remind us that compassion flourishes in everyday moments, often unseen but deeply felt. Suffering invites us to cultivate patience and acceptance, to soften our reactions and open our hearts. It teaches us to listen deeply, not just to others, but to the whispers of our own pain. Through this listening, compassion arises naturally, like a flower blooming in fertile soil. Sometimes compassion is a silent presence, a hand resting gently, a gaze that says, "You are not alone." Other times, it is a bold act of forgiveness, a choice to release anger and embrace healing. It moves us beyond judgment into the realm of shared vulnerability and understanding. As we journey through these stories and reflections, we come to see that suffering and compassion are intertwined. One calls forth the other. Together, they lead us to a place of deep rest, not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of peace within it. So now, take a breath and feel the rhythm of this truth within you. Know that whatever challenges you face, you carry within you the capacity to respond with kindness and strength. And as you listen, allow these stories to gently unfold, opening a space for compassion to grow in your heart. There is a subtle power in the act of listening, a power that transforms not just the speaker, but the listener as well. In Buddhist practice, listening is more than hearing words. It is a deep, compassionate presence that holds space for another's suffering without judgment or interruption. It's a gift that offers rest, a moment of relief in the midst of life's storms. Imagine a traveler arriving at a monastery, weary from long roads and heavy burdens. She carries grief too vast to name, and a heart worn thin by loss. The monks welcome her without questions or expectations. Instead, they sit beside her, sharing silence, their calm breathing weaving a gentle cocoon of safety. Over days, the traveler finds herself less alone. The walls of pain that once seemed impenetrable begin to soften. She starts to speak, at first in whispers, then with growing confidence. She tells her story, and the monks listen, not as strangers, but as companions on a shared path. In this quiet community, she learns that compassion is not about fixing what is broken. It is about being with what is, fully and without resistance. It is about holding the fragile pieces of life with tender hands. Listening like this requires courage and humility. It asks us to set aside our own agendas, to quiet the chatter in our minds, and to simply be present. It is a practice of love in action. There was a time when a monk sat beside a man who had just lost everything in a flood. Their home, their livelihood, their sense of security. The man wept openly, overwhelmed by the sudden void. The monk did not offer words of consolation or quick answers. He simply placed a steady hand on the man's shoulder and breathed alongside him. That hand, that breath, became a lifeline. It reminded the man that pain is not something to be feared or hidden, but something to be met with openness. In that meeting, a seed of healing was planted. We often forget how much power rests in such simple acts. The willingness to listen, to stay with suffering without flinching, to allow another's story to unfold without rushing or interruption. This is the heart of compassionate presence. In our own lives, we may find moments where others come to us carrying their pain. They may not ask for solutions or advice. Often, they simply need someone to hear them, to witness their struggle without judgment. If we can offer that, we offer a form of deep rest, not just for them, but for ourselves, because compassion is a bridge, linking hearts in shared understanding, and in crossing that bridge, we discover we are not alone. Listening is also a way to listen to ourselves. We may carry within us stories and pains that have gone unspoken, held tight in silence. Through gentle attention and kindness, we can begin to untangle these threads. We can offer ourselves the same compassion we wish to extend to others. The path of compassion is not always easy. It requires patience, openness, and a willingness to face discomfort. Yet, it is also profoundly healing. It softens the heart, quiets the mind, and creates space for deep rest. As you sit with these words now, allow yourself to feel the presence of compassion, both given and received. Let it wash over you like a gentle tide, easing tension, soothing worries, and reminding you of your innate capacity for kindness. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to fix the pain. Your presence is enough. Your listening is a balm. Let this moment be an invitation, a call to embrace the practice of compassionate listening in your own life, to be present with others and with yourself in ways that foster healing and connection. Breath by breath, moment by moment, compassion grows. And in that growth, suffering becomes not a burden to bear alone, but a shared journey toward understanding and peace. There is a deep wisdom in the way Buddhist stories unfold, sometimes simple, sometimes complex, but always inviting us into a space of reflection and compassion. One such story centers on a farmer who faced great loss, yet responded with a quiet acceptance that many find challenging to embody. The farmer's horse ran away, and his neighbors exclaimed, "Such bad luck." But the farmer simply said, "Maybe." Soon after, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. The neighbors then exclaimed. Again, the farmer said, "Maybe." When his son broke his leg trying to tame one of the wild horses, neighbors lamented, "Bad luck." And again, the farmer responded, "Maybe." Later, the army came to draft young men into war, but passed over the son because of his injury. Once more, neighbors said, "Good luck." And once more, the farmer said, "Maybe." This story teaches us about the nature of uncertainty and impermanence. Life unfolds in ways we cannot predict or control, and our judgments of events as good or bad are often premature. The farmer's equanimity, his willingness to see beyond immediate appearances, embodies a profound acceptance that leads to peace amid turmoil. We all encounter moments that shake our assumptions, where pain and joy intermingle, and where the path ahead feels unclear. This story invites us to cultivate a similar openness, to pause before labeling our experiences, to hold them gently in our hearts, and to trust that wisdom will emerge in time. Such acceptance does not mean passivity or resignation. Rather, it's an active engagement with life as it is, without grasping or aversion. It's a practice of meeting each moment fully, with curiosity and compassion. In Buddhist teachings, this attitude is deeply connected to the understanding of impermanence, that all things arise and pass away. When we recognize this truth, we can begin to loosen our attachments and find freedom from suffering. This freedom is not about escaping pain, but about transforming our relationship to it. By embracing uncertainty and impermanence, we learn to rest in the flow of life, even when it feels turbulent. The farmer's story gently reminds us that our suffering can become a teacher, guiding us toward deeper awareness and compassion. It asks us to trust in the unfolding of life and to cultivate patience, knowing that clarity often arrives in its own time. As you listen, consider where you might hold tightly to judgments or expectations. What might happen if you allowed yourself to say, maybe, to open space for possibility and healing? Through such openings, we find a path to deep rest, a rest that is not dependent on circumstances, but arises from an inner steadiness and acceptance. Let these reflections settle into your breath, into your heart. Know that in the uncertainty and change, you are not alone. You are part of a vast human experience, connected by the shared journey of suffering and compassion. And from this connection, true peace begins. There is a profound story from Buddhist tradition about a woman named Kisa Gotami, whose experience speaks directly to the heart of suffering and compassion. Her child died suddenly, and in her grief, she wandered from house to house, desperate for a medicine to bring him back. People looked at her with pity, but none could help. Finally, she was directed to the Buddha. She approached him, her heart raw and broken, clutching a small mustard seed, which the Buddha instructed her to bring from a home untouched by death. Filled with hope, she traveled, seeking the seed. But everywhere she went, death had visited. A mother grieving a lost child, a family mourning a father, neighbors remembering those gone. Slowly, the weight of her isolation began to lift. She realized that death is a shared experience, part of the human condition. This insight did not erase her sorrow, but opened her heart to compassion, not only for herself but for all beings touched by loss. Kisa Gotami's journey teaches us that suffering is universal, and that in embracing this truth, we find connection rather than separation. It invites us to transform grief through awareness, to allow pain to soften into kindness. Her story also reminds us of the importance of patience and gentle acceptance. We cannot hasten the processes of grief or healing, but we can hold space for them, offering ourselves the same compassion we would give to others. When we stop resisting the reality of loss and instead meet it with open-hearted presence, we create room for deep rest to arise. Not a rest that denies pain, but one that coexists with it. A rest grounded in understanding and tenderness. This is the essence of Buddhist compassion, recognizing our shared vulnerability and responding with kindness. It is an invitation to sit with suffering, to witness it fully, and through that witnessing, to be transformed. Kisa Gotami's story is a mirror for our own experiences. It encourages us to move from isolation to community, from despair to hope, from resistance to acceptance. As you listen, you might reflect on your own losses, your own moments of deep pain. What would it mean to hold those moments with compassion? To see them as part of the larger human story, connecting you to others rather than separating you. In this shared experience lies the possibility of profound healing. Suffering, when met with understanding, becomes a teacher, guiding us toward empathy, patience, and ultimately peace. So as you breathe now, imagine carrying your own mustard seed, a symbol not of hope for a quick fix, but of the slow, unfolding process of healing. Let it remind you that you are not alone, that your pain is seen, and that compassion is always within reach. May this awareness bring you closer to the deep rest that comes from true acceptance. There's a story of a farmer who faced both fortune and hardship with the same calm acceptance, embodying the very essence of equanimity. When his horse ran away, his neighbors lamented, "What bad luck." But the farmer simply replied, "Maybe." Not long after, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. The neighbors exclaimed, "What good luck." Again, the farmer said, "Maybe." His son tried to tame one of the wild horses, but was thrown, breaking his leg. The neighbors cried, "Bad luck." The farmer responded once more, "Maybe." When the army came to draft young men for war, they passed over the son because of his injury. The neighbors declared, "Good luck." And again, the farmer said, "Maybe." This simple yet profound story offers a powerful lesson on the nature of suffering and the impermanence of circumstances. Life does not conform to our expectations of good or bad, success or failure. Instead, it flows in an ever-changing dance that we cannot control. The farmer's ability to remain balanced amidst uncertainty invites us to cultivate the same steadiness in our own hearts. When we practice this openness, we allow ourselves to rest deeply in the present moment, releasing the tight grip of judgment and resistance. We learn to meet life's unfolding with curiosity rather than fear, with kindness rather than impatience. This way of being is not about passivity or indifference. It is an active engagement with the world, grounded in wisdom and compassion. It asks us to trust in the unknown and to embrace the possibility that every moment, no matter how challenging, carries the seed of awakening. In our own lives, we face moments that test this practice. Loss, change, disappointment, they all invite us to ask, what if this too is part of a greater unfolding? The farmer's story encourages us to soften our reactions, to step back from immediate conclusions, and to open ourselves to the richness of experience beyond labels. Through such patience and openness, suffering transforms from a weight to bear into a teacher guiding us toward freedom. The balance we cultivate becomes a refuge, a deep rest that sustains us through life's inevitable ups and downs. So, as you listen now, imagine the farmer's quiet presence, the steady gaze that does not rush to judge, but accepts what is with gentle equanimity. Let that image settle in your mind and breathe with it. Allow yourself to feel the possibility of peace that comes from releasing the need to control outcomes. Know that this balance is within reach for all of us. It is a path walked step by step, breath by breath. And in embracing this path, we discover that suffering, when met with wisdom and compassion, can become a doorway to profound rest and awakening. There is a story that beautifully illustrates the quiet strength of patience and endurance in the face of suffering. It tells of a woman married to a man known for his harshness and quick temper. Each day, she endured his sharp words and difficult moods. Neighbors wondered why she did not leave or respond in kind. But the woman bore her suffering with a calm and steady heart. One day, a traveler asked her, "Why do you endure such treatment without anger or bitterness?" She replied, "If someone offers me a gift and I do not accept it, to whom does it belong?" The traveler was puzzled. She explained, "His anger is his own. I do not have to carry it with me." Her patience was not passive acceptance, but a powerful act of compassion. Both for herself and for her husband, she created a space in which anger could exist, without consuming either of them. This story reveals a profound teaching. We cannot always control the actions of others, but we can choose how we relate to them. Compassion includes boundaries, and patience is an active, courageous practice. When we meet suffering with such patience, we cultivate inner peace that is not dependent on changing external circumstances. It is a deep rest born from understanding and acceptance. Her example invites us to consider where in our own lives we might practice this kind of patience. Where do we allow others' emotions to affect us unnecessarily? How might we hold ourselves gently in difficult relationships? This teaching encourages us to step back, to recognize the difference between what belongs to us and what belongs to another. It offers freedom from the heavy burden of carrying pain that is not ours to carry. Through this freedom, our hearts open, compassion expands, not only for others but for ourselves. We learn that kindness begins with the willingness to remain soft amid hardship, and this softness does not signify weakness, but strength. The strength to meet life as it is, without closing down. As you reflect on this story, take a moment to breathe deeply. Allow yourself to sense where patience might be needed in your own life. Imagine holding your heart with the same gentle care this woman held her own suffering. In that openness lies the path to healing and rest, not from avoiding pain, but from meeting it with courage and compassion. The rest that follows is profound and lasting because it comes from true understanding. And as you carry this teaching with you, may it inspire you to cultivate patience and kindness in every corner of your life. There is a tale that gently teaches us about the power of transformation. The story of a man named Angulimala, whose life was once marked by fear and violence. He was known across the land as a ruthless bandit, feared by all. His name means garland of fingers, a chilling reminder of the lives he had taken. Yet, beneath this terrifying reputation was a man lost in suffering, searching for meaning and peace. Angulimala had once been a devoted student, but jealousy and misunderstanding turned him down a dark path. His heart became hardened by pain, and he believed violence was the only way to survive. One day, he encountered the Buddha, a man whose calm presence and profound compassion broke through Angulimala's armor of fear and hatred. Instead of meeting violence with violence, the Buddha met Angulimala with steady kindness. He spoke softly, inviting him to stop the cycle of harm. This was not a demand, but an offering, a chance for redemption. Angulimala, struck by this unexpected compassion, laid down his weapons and chose a new path. He became a monk, dedicating himself to peace and transformation. Though his past could not be erased, his present was a testament to the power of awakening. His story teaches us that suffering can lead to transformation when met with compassion. No matter how deep the wounds, no matter how far one has strayed, the door to healing remains open. It reminds us that compassion is not weakness, but a profound strength that can change hearts and lives. And that true rest comes not from avoiding our shadows, but from bringing light into them. As you listen, consider the parts of your life where transformation is possible. Where might compassion gently call you to a new way of being? How might suffering become a teacher guiding you toward deeper understanding? In embracing these questions, we begin to walk the path of healing, one step at a time, with patience and love. There's a story that unfolds quietly but holds a powerful message about the healing power of compassion and presence. In a small village, a monk once cared for a sick horse, an animal no one else seemed to notice, lying weak and trembling on the forest floor. The horse had served the community faithfully, yet now, in its frailty, it was almost forgotten. The monk approached gently, bringing water, soothing words, and his steady presence. He did not try to fix or change the horse's condition. Instead, he simply offered kindness, staying close, honoring the life before him. In this simple act, he taught a profound lesson: compassion is often about being there, fully present, without agenda or expectation. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always mean curing. Sometimes it means creating space for rest and dignity, for comfort in the face of vulnerability. When we extend this kind of presence to ourselves and others, we open the door to deep rest, a rest that arises from acceptance and love, even amid struggle. As you breathe now, imagine offering that same gentle presence to any part of yourself that feels weak or weary. Allow compassion to wash over you, softening tension, quieting judgment. In this quiet space, suffering can shift, not necessarily disappear, but become more bearable, more human. Compassion invites us into this space of rest. It is a bridge between pain and peace, an embrace that holds us tenderly as we navigate the complexities of life. Let this awareness settle within you now, a reminder that even in weakness, there is beauty. Even in struggle, there is connection, and in that connection there is hope. In a quiet village, not far from a winding river, lived an elderly woman known for her simple grace. Each morning, she swept the temple steps with gentle care, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Though her offerings were modest, a small bowl of rice, a handful of wildflowers, her presence was rich with warmth and humility. One day, a visiting monk asked her, "Why do you give so freely, even when you have little yourself?" She smiled softly and replied, "Because giving nourishes my heart as much as it feeds others." Her words carry a timeless truth. Compassion is not measured by grand gestures, but by consistent, heartfelt acts, no matter how small. In giving without expectation, she discovered a deep rest, a peace that comes from aligning one's life with kindness. Her example invites us to consider how generosity, in all its forms, can become a practice of healing, not just for those who receive, but for those who give. It reminds us that compassion begins with presence and flows naturally into action. In our own lives, we might not sweep temple steps or offer bowls of rice, but each of us has the capacity to offer simple kindnesses that ripple outward. An encouraging word, a patient ear, a gentle touch. These acts, though subtle, are powerful. They weave a tapestry of connection and support that sustains communities and nurtures the soul. This story also speaks to the beauty of humility, the understanding that no act of compassion is too small or insignificant. Each gesture, like a single flower placed with intention, holds the potential to bloom in ways unseen. As you breathe in now, consider the small ways you might cultivate this spirit of giving in your daily life. Perhaps it's reaching out to someone who feels alone, offering forgiveness to yourself, or simply being present with your own pain without judgment. Through such openness, compassion becomes a wellspring of strength and rest. It teaches us that in giving, we receive, and in serving others, we find ourselves. May this quiet generosity inspire you to approach your days with a gentle heart and a willing hand, knowing that even the smallest acts carry profound meaning. And as you carry this spirit forward, may it bring you closer to the deep rest that is the true gift of compassion. There is a story about a young child who taught a village about the purest form of compassion. This child, innocent and open-hearted, noticed the pain of others without hesitation or judgment. One day, while playing near a stream, she saw a small bird with a broken wing struggling to fly. Without fear or hesitation, she picked up the fragile creature and cradled it in her hands. She carried the bird home, cared for it gently, and whispered kind words to soothe its fear. The villagers watched her with curiosity, some wondering why a child would concern herself with such a small, insignificant life. But in her actions, she revealed a profound truth. Compassion requires no grand gestures, no special qualifications, only a willing heart. Her tender care did not immediately heal the bird, but it offered a safe space for rest and recovery. This is the essence of compassionate presence, not to fix, but to hold space, not to rush, but to wait patiently with love. In our own lives, we might feel powerless against the suffering around us. Yet, like this child, we each have the capacity to offer kindness that ripples outward, creating waves of healing. Compassion begins with small acts, repeated with intention and humility. It teaches us that every life, every moment, deserves gentle attention. Through this attention, deep rest can arise, a rest born from the peace of connection and care. As you breathe in this story, imagine the openness of the child's heart, the softness in her hands, the courage to care without expectation. Let this image inspire you to approach your own suffering and that of others with the same gentle presence. Compassion invites us to be fully present, to listen deeply, and to respond with kindness, even when the path ahead is uncertain. May this story remind you that no act of compassion is too small, and that through patience and love, healing unfolds naturally. Let yourself rest now in this awareness, carrying forward the child's spirit of tender care into all that you do. There's a story about a warrior who, after years of battle and conflict, found himself weighed down by sorrow and regret. Once celebrated for his strength and courage, he now felt hollow inside, burdened by the lives he had taken and the pain he had caused. The constant noise of war had quieted, leaving only the echoes of loss and loneliness. Seeking peace, he journeyed to a monastery nestled in the mountains, hoping for guidance. There, he met a humble monk who listened without judgment, his presence steady and kind. The warrior shared his story, the battles, the victories, the guilt. The monk did not offer quick answers or empty comfort. Instead, he said simply, "Your past cannot be changed, but your heart can be." He invited the warrior to sit with his pain, not to suppress it or deny it, but to face it with openness and compassion. Day after day, the warrior returned, sitting quietly, learning to breathe through his sorrow, allowing it to soften rather than harden his spirit. Over time, the weight began to lift. The warrior discovered a new strength, not one forged in combat, but one born from vulnerability and acceptance. His story reminds us that transformation is possible, even in the darkest places. That suffering, when met with compassion, can become a path to healing. It teaches us that courage is not just the absence of fear, but the willingness to be present with what frightens us most. And in that presence, we find a deep rest, not the rest of escape, but the rest of surrender and peace. As you listen, consider the battles you carry, the regrets, the wounds, the heavy memories. What would it mean to bring compassion to those parts of yourself? To sit with your own pain as the warrior did, allowing it space to breathe and transform. This is the path of healing, not hurried or forced, but gentle and steady. And in walking this path, we discover that suffering is not the end, but a beginning of compassion, wisdom, and deep rest. In the heart of Buddhist teaching lies a deep understanding. Suffering is not something to be feared or avoided, but a profound teacher inviting us into compassion. One of the most tender stories illustrating this truth is that of a child who cared without hesitation. A young boy noticed a small bird near his home, struggling with a broken wing. Instead of turning away, he gently cradled the fragile creature, offering warmth and comfort. He didn't know how to heal the wing, but he knew how to be present. His simple act of kindness rippled through the village, reminding everyone that compassion doesn't require grand gestures, only an open heart willing to care. Sometimes healing begins not with fixing, but with holding space. This story invites us to consider the power of presence, the quiet strength of gentle care. When we offer compassion without expectation, we create a sanctuary for rest and recovery, both for others and ourselves. As you listen now, imagine holding your own pain as tenderly as the boy held the bird. Allow compassion to soften any tension or resistance within you. This is the essence of deep rest, a rest that arises when we meet suffering not with judgment, but with kindness. In embracing this practice, we discover that compassion is not a burden, but a balm, a bridge connecting us through shared vulnerability. Let this awareness settle in your heart, guiding you toward patience, love, and profound peace. There's a story from a distant monastery about an old monk who, despite his years and wisdom, was known for his gentle smile and kind heart. One evening, a young novice approached him, troubled and restless. The novice confessed, "Master, I struggle to find peace. My mind is like a storm and I cannot rest." The old monk listened patiently, then shared a simple teaching. "Peace," he said softly, "does not come from silence alone, but from the way we meet what arises within us." He explained that suffering, like a storm, is natural. It comes and goes, and trying to push it away only makes it stronger. But if we learn to stay with it, to breathe through it with kindness, the storm begins to calm. The novice was puzzled. "How can I sit with pain and still find rest?" The monk smiled. "By treating your pain as a guest, not an enemy. Welcome it with curiosity and compassion. Watch it with gentle eyes. Let it speak without fear." This teaching captures the essence of deep rest, the rest that is not the absence of suffering, but the presence of acceptance. It reminds us that compassion includes ourselves, that we can meet our own pain with the same tenderness we offer others. As you breathe now, imagine welcoming your own inner storms. Notice how your breath can be a calm harbor amid turbulent waves. Allow yourself to rest in this compassionate presence, knowing that peace grows in the space between struggle and surrender. In this space, transformation unfolds, pain softens, wisdom arises, and the heart learns to rest deeply. May this teaching inspire you to bring kindness to your own suffering and to discover the gentle strength that lives within. In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills, there lived an old monk known not for grand teachings, but for his extraordinary kindness. One day, a traveler arrived, burdened by grief and exhaustion. She sought refuge, hoping for solace but unsure if she would find it. The monk welcomed her with a warm smile and a simple invitation: "Sit with me and rest. You need not speak unless you wish to." For days, she stayed, sitting beside the monk in silence. He did not ask about her pain or try to fix it. Instead, he offered his steady presence, a quiet refuge from the storm inside her heart. Slowly, the traveler's heavy sighs became lighter. Her tears found space to fall, and in that stillness, she discovered a new kind of rest, not the absence of sorrow, but a peace that coexists with it. This story reminds us that sometimes the greatest gift we can offer ourselves or others is simply to be present, to hold space without judgment, to allow healing to unfold naturally. In Buddhist compassion, this practice of presence is central. It teaches us that suffering is not to be feared or avoided, but to be met with openness and love. Through this meeting, deep rest arises, nurturing the heart and soothing the mind. As you listen now, imagine yourself in that quiet village, resting beside the monk. Feel the gentle calm of his presence enveloping you, softening your burdens. Allow yourself to breathe deeply into this space of compassionate rest, knowing that you are held, seen, and loved just as you are. In this holding, healing begins, compassion blooms, and you find the deep rest that sustains the soul. May this story inspire you to cultivate such presence in your own life, to offer kindness to yourself and others, and to find peace amid life's challenges. There's a tale about a prisoner whose life was once marked by violence and despair. Locked away behind cold stone walls, he carried the heavy weight of guilt and anger, isolated from the world. When a Buddhist teacher began visiting the prison, offering mindfulness practices, the prisoner was skeptical. How could breathing exercises or meditation change his fate? Yet, slowly, he began to soften. Sitting in silence, observing his breath, he faced the storm within, his fear, his regret, his pain. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel compassion, not just for others, but for himself. The journey was not easy. Old wounds surfaced, Tears came unbidden. But with each breath, he learned to hold his suffering with kindness, to meet his shadow without judgment. Over time, transformation took root. He discovered that even in the darkest places, the light of compassion could shine. His heart opened, and with it a new possibility: freedom, not from the prison walls, but from the prison within. This story reminds us that suffering does not have to define us. Through compassionate awareness, we can begin to heal, to rest deeply, even in difficult circumstances. As you listen, consider the places within yourself that feel confined or burdened. What would it mean to bring compassion there? To breathe gently into your pain, allowing it to soften. This is the path of true freedom, one that begins in the heart, through the simple but profound practice of compassionate presence. May this story inspire you to carry compassion into your own struggles and to discover the deep rest that comes from healing and acceptance. In a quiet monastery, a young novice once asked his teacher, "How do I find peace when my heart is so restless?" The teacher smiled gently and replied, "Peace is not a place you find outside. It is a state you cultivate inside, through compassion and acceptance." He told the novice a story about a tree that weathered many storms. Each gust of wind, each heavy rain tested its strength. Sometimes the branches bent low, and sometimes leaves were torn away. But the tree never resisted the storm. It swayed with the wind, rooted deeply in the earth. The tree teaches us, the teacher said, to welcome suffering without clinging or pushing away, to rest in the midst of life's storms, knowing they pass. The novice listened, breathing in the wisdom of the story. He began to see that rest comes not from escaping pain, but from embracing it with kindness. This teaching invites us to soften into life's challenges, to meet them with a gentle heart. In doing so, we open the door to deep rest, a rest that nourishes the soul and calms the mind. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as that tree, strong, flexible, rooted, and alive. Let your breath flow with the rhythm of the wind, steady and calm. Allow yourself to rest in this moment, knowing that peace is always within reach when we greet life with compassion. In a remote village, a farmer faced a great loss when his beloved horse ran away. Neighbors came to express sympathy, calling it bad luck. Yet the farmer replied simply, "Maybe." Not long after, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. The neighbors called this good luck, and again the farmer said, "Maybe." When his son tried to tame one of the wild horses and broke his leg, the villagers said, "Bad luck," and the farmer said, "Maybe." Later, when the army came to draft young men for war but passed over his injured son, neighbors declared, "Good luck," and the farmer's response remained unchanged, "Maybe." This story teaches us to hold a space of openness amid life's uncertainties, reminding us that events are rarely wholly good or bad. It encourages us to cultivate patience and equanimity, to embrace the unfolding of life without immediate judgment. As you reflect on this story, consider how often we rush to label experiences, how we cling to outcomes that may not be in our control. The farmer's calm acceptance invites us to rest deeply in the present moment, finding peace not in external circumstances, but within ourselves. In this practice lies freedom, a freedom that softens suffering and nurtures compassion. Let yourself breathe with this understanding, allowing your heart to open to the ebb and flow of life's mysteries. There was once a warrior whose life was defined by conflict. He was celebrated for his strength and feared for his ferocity. But beneath his armor lay a heart burdened by sorrow and regret. After years of battle, the warrior sought a new path, one not paved with violence, but with healing. He journeyed to a monastery high in the mountains, where an elderly monk welcomed him with quiet kindness. The warrior confessed his pain, his guilt, and the emptiness he felt. The monk listened without judgment, then spoke softly, "Your past cannot be undone, but but your heart can be transformed. Each day, the warrior sat in meditation, learning to face his suffering with compassion. He did not run from his shadows, but met them with gentle courage. Slowly, the weight of his burden lifted, replaced by a peace he had never known. This story reminds us that no matter how deep our wounds, healing is possible. Compassion opens the door to transformation, and through it, we find deep rest, not from avoiding pain, but from embracing it with love. As you listen, imagine the warrior's journey, a path from despair to awakening. Consider where in your own life transformation might begin through compassion and presence. May this story inspire you to meet your struggles with kindness and to discover the peace that lies within. There is a story about a monk who lived quietly near a forest, known not for grand teachings, but for his compassionate presence. One day, a tiger appeared in the clearing where the monk sat in meditation. The villagers feared the beast and advised the monk to flee, but he remained still. The tiger circled, its eyes bright with hunger, yet the monk bowed his head gently, showing no fear. After a long moment, the tiger quietly turned and disappeared into the trees. When asked why he did not run, the monk said, "Fear is natural, but it does not need to control us. When we meet fear with calm and kindness, it loses its power." This story teaches us that deep rest comes not from avoiding our fears or suffering, but from meeting them with awareness and compassion. It reminds us that courage is not absence of fear, but the choice to stay present with it. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as the monk, rooted, calm, and open-hearted. Even in the face of life's challenges, let this presence grow within you, bringing a peaceful steadiness to your mind and heart. Through such courage, we discover the profound rest that lies beneath agitation and worry, a rest born of compassionate acceptance. May this story inspire you to face your own fears with gentle strength and to find peace in the midst of uncertainty. In a small village, a child's compassion touched the hearts of many without words or grand gestures. One day the child found a bird with a broken wing, struggling to fly. Without fear or hesitation, the child gently picked it up and cradled it in their hands. Though the child did not know how to heal the bird, they offered warmth, care, and a safe place to rest. The bird's fragile life was met with gentle presence, allowing it space to recover in its own time. This tender act shows us that compassion is not about fixing everything immediately. It is about holding space for suffering and offering kindness without expectation. Sometimes, healing begins not with change, but with acceptance and care. As you breathe now, imagine yourself holding your own pain with the same gentle hands, offering it patience and love. Feel the softening that arises when we meet suffering with compassion rather than resistance. Through such presence, we find deep rest, not the absence of difficulty, but a peaceful coexistence with life's challenges. May this story inspire you to cultivate kindness in small acts, nurturing the gentle heart within us all. There was once a young monk who carried a deep sorrow within him. He had lost his family in a sudden storm and felt the weight of grief settle like a heavy stone on his heart. Seeking solace, he came to the monastery, hoping the teachings might ease his pain. The elder monks welcomed him without question, offering only their presence and quiet companionship. The young monk learned to sit with his sorrow, to breathe it in without resistance. Day by day, the heaviness began to soften. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the young monk whispered to his teacher, "How do I find peace when my heart still aches?" The elder smiled gently and replied, "Peace is not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of compassion for yourself and for all who suffer." This simple truth transformed the young monk. He realized that by embracing his own pain with kindness, he opened his heart wider, allowing healing to unfold naturally. His story teaches us that suffering is not a barrier to compassion, but its gateway. When we meet our pain with gentle awareness, we create space for deep rest and renewal. As you breathe now, imagine holding your own sorrow with that same tenderness. Allow yourself to rest in the comfort of compassionate presence, knowing you are not alone. In this embrace, healing begins and peace quietly blooms. May this story inspire you to meet your suffering and that of others with open hearts and gentle hands. In a quiet corner of a distant village, an elderly woman lived a simple life marked by patience and generosity. Each morning, she would sweep the temple steps with a calm heart, never rushing, never complaining. Her offerings were small, a bowl of rice, a handful of herbs, but given with profound care. One day, a young monk asked her, "Why do you give so much when you have so little yourself?" She smiled warmly and replied, "Giving nourishes me as much as it helps others. Compassion is a gift we offer to ourselves and to the world." Her words carry a timeless lesson. True compassion is not measured by grand acts, but by consistent kindness in everyday moments. Through humble giving, she found a deep rest, a peace that filled her days. This story invites us to reflect on the small ways we can cultivate compassion. Each act of kindness, no matter how modest, creates ripples of healing and connection. As you breathe now, imagine offering gentle care to those around you and to yourself. Let this intention fill you with warmth and openness. In these simple acts, we find the path to lasting peace and compassionate rest. May this story inspire you to live with a generous heart, embracing the power of kindness in all you do. A young monk once struggled deeply with anger. No matter how hard he tried, the fire within him seemed to burn uncontrollably, leaving him restless and troubled. Seeking guidance, he approached his teacher and confessed his turmoil. The teacher listened quietly, then said, "Anger is like a wild horse. If you try to force it or run from it, you only make it stronger. But if you learn to sit with it calmly, to understand its fear and pain, it can become a loyal companion." The monk was skeptical but began to practice this teaching. Instead of pushing away his anger, he observed it with curiosity and kindness. Over time, the fierce blaze softened into a warm glow, a sign of transformation. This story teaches us that suffering, even in the form of difficult emotions, holds the potential to become a source of growth. Compassion begins when we stop resisting and start understanding. As you breathe now, imagine welcoming your own difficult feelings, not as enemies, but as messengers inviting your attention and care. Let your breath create space for healing and rest. Through such gentle awareness, the storm inside can settle, revealing a calm and compassionate heart beneath. May this story inspire you to approach your inner struggles with patience and to find peace through compassion's embrace. In a small village surrounded by mountains, there was a teacher who was known not for loud sermons but for quiet presence. One day, a weary traveler arrived, burdened by grief and uncertainty. Without a word, the teacher offered a seat beside a flowing stream and invited the traveler to listen. They sat together, watching the water move, sometimes rushing, sometimes gentle, always changing. The teacher said, "Suffering is like this river. It moves through us, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm. We cannot stop its flow, but we can learn to flow with it." The traveler, feeling the river's rhythm, began to understand that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the acceptance of life's natural ebb and flow. This story teaches us to meet suffering with openness, to allow it space without resistance. In doing so, we find deep rest, not as a distant goal, but as a present reality. As you breathe now, imagine yourself beside that river, letting your worries flow away with the current. Allow compassion to settle in your heart, soothing your mind. Through this gentle acceptance, rest becomes possible amid life's changing tides. May this teaching inspire you to embrace your own journey with kindness and patience. In the stillness of the forest, there was a monk whose compassion was known far and wide. One winter, a traveler arrived, shivering and weary from the cold. Without hesitation, the monk offered his own robe and shared his sparse meal. The traveler asked, "Why do you give so freely, even when you have so little?" The monk replied, "Compassion is not a calculation of abundance, but an expression of the heart. When we share what we have, no matter how little, we create warmth that cannot be measured." This simple act speaks to a profound truth. Compassion grows not from surplus, but from the willingness to open ourselves fully. In giving, we receive. In kindness, we find connection. As you breathe now, imagine offering your own warmth, be it time, attention, or understanding, to yourself and others. Feel how generosity softens barriers and nurtures deep rest. Through such openness, suffering becomes a shared journey rather than a solitary burden. May this story inspire you to give freely and rest deeply in the light of compassion. A young woman once came to a monastery, carrying a heavy heart burdened by loss and regret. She sought answers, but the silence of the monks felt both comforting and unsettling. One elder approached and said softly, "Peace is not something you find outside. It is a place you cultivate within." He told her the story of a river, flowing relentlessly through mountains and valleys. Sometimes calm, sometimes wild, it accepts every obstacle without resistance. "The river teaches us to flow with life's changes," he said, "to meet suffering with openness and grace." This metaphor invites us to soften our resistance to pain and loss, to embrace the natural rhythms of life. When we allow ourselves to flow rather than fight, we discover deep rest, not from escaping sorrow, but from accepting it as part of the journey. As you listen, imagine yourself as the river, moving steadily, adapting with compassion and strength. Let your breath become the current, carrying you gently forward. Through this embrace, suffering becomes a teacher, guiding us toward healing and peace. May this story inspire you to meet your own waves with courage and kindness. There was a time when a monk sat beneath a great banyan tree, teaching the villagers about the nature of suffering. He told them, "Suffering is like the changing seasons. It comes and goes, sometimes harsh, sometimes gentle. If we resist the winter's cold, we only make ourselves colder. But if we accept it, we can find warmth within." He invited them to imagine the seasons as teachers, each offering lessons in patience, resilience, and compassion. The villagers learned that by embracing suffering rather than fleeing it, they could discover a deeper rest, one not dependent on circumstances, but rooted in acceptance. This teaching encourages us to see our pain as a natural part of life's cycle, not as a punishment or failure. When we meet suffering with kindness, we open a door to healing and peace. As you breathe now, feel yourself rooted like the banyan tree, steady through the changing seasons of your own life. Allow compassion to grow within, softening the edges of pain. In this presence, find the deep rest that comes from embracing life fully, with all its joys and sorrows. May this story inspire you to live with openness and grace, welcoming each season as a chance to awaken. There was once a king who, despite all his power and wealth, felt a deep emptiness within. Seeking to understand the nature of suffering, he disguised himself as a common man and traveled among his people. One day, he came upon a humble monk sitting beneath a tree, radiating calm and peace. The king approached and asked, "How do you find such peace when the world is full of pain?" The monk replied, "Peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence of compassion. When we open our hearts to suffering, with kindness for ourselves and others, we find a rest that no crown can grant." The king pondered these words and realized that true power lies not in control, but in compassion. He returned to his palace transformed, ruling with a gentle heart and deep understanding. This story teaches us that compassion is the key to healing and peace. It invites us to soften toward our own suffering and that of the world, discovering rest in that embrace. As you breathe now, Imagine opening your heart with the king's humility and the monk's kindness. Feel compassion flowing through you, calming your mind and soothing your soul. In this sacred space, may you find the deep rest that is your birthright. A young woman once journeyed to a monastery, carrying a heart heavy with grief and longing. She sought solace, hoping the quiet walls and gentle monks could ease her pain. The elder welcomed her softly, offering a seat beneath an ancient tree. She asked, "How do I find peace when my sorrow feels endless?" The elder replied, "Peace does not come by fleeing sorrow, but by embracing it with an open heart. When we hold our pain gently, without resistance, we create space for healing and rest." He told her the story of a lotus flower growing in the mud, beautiful not despite the darkness, but because of it. The flower's journey through the muck to the light reminds us that suffering can give rise to compassion and wisdom. As you breathe now, imagine holding your own sorrow like the lotus holds the mud, with grace and resilience. Allow compassion to soften your edges, to quiet the mind's chatter. In this gentle embrace, find the deep rest that comes from acceptance and love. May this story inspire you to meet your pain with kindness and to discover peace amid life's storms. There once was a monk who lived simply at the edge of a quiet forest. Each morning, he greeted the dawn with a deep breath, welcoming the day with calm and gratitude. Villagers often asked him, "How do you remain so peaceful amid life's troubles?" He would smile and say, "Peace comes not from the absence of suffering, but from embracing it with an open heart." One day, a young seeker came to him, troubled by the noise of the world and the heaviness of their own pain. The monk invited the seeker to sit quietly beside him under the shade of an old tree. Together, they listened to the rustling leaves, to the distant birdsong, to the gentle rhythm of breath. In that stillness, the seeker found a new kind of rest, not the kind that escapes life's challenges, but the kind that meets them fully, with kindness and presence. This story teaches us that peace is a practice of openness, a gentle invitation to hold suffering without resistance. It reminds us that deep rest is found in the embrace of compassion, both for ourselves and for the world. As you breathe now, imagine sitting beside that old tree. Feel the calmness in the air, the steady beat of your own heart. Allow yourself to rest in this compassionate space, knowing you are held. May this story inspire you to find peace in stillness and compassion in every breath. There was a man who once held tightly to his anger and resentment, believing they protected him from pain. But over time, these feelings grew heavy, like chains that bound his heart. Seeking relief, he visited a wise teacher known for her gentle presence. She told him, "Holding anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." She invited him to sit quietly, to breathe deeply, and to meet his anger not as an enemy, but as a messenger. At first, it felt unbearable, but with patience and kindness, he learned to soften, to listen. Through this practice, anger transformed from a consuming fire into a signal, a teacher guiding him toward understanding and compassion. This story reminds us that even our darkest emotions can be pathways to healing when approached with care. As you breathe now, imagine offering your own anger or pain a gentle, compassionate gaze. Feel the possibility of transformation in this embrace. May this story inspire you to turn toward your inner fire with kindness, discovering the deep rest that follows acceptance. There was once a humble gardener who tended a quiet garden full of wildflowers and ancient trees. Each day, she would walk slowly among the plants, noticing every leaf, every bloom, every shift of light. She didn't rush to prune or arrange, but allowed the garden to grow as it wished. One season, a fierce storm swept through the village, tearing branches and flattening blossoms. Neighbors lamented the damage, but the gardener said, "The storm has its own wisdom. In its wake, new growth will arise." As the weeks passed, the garden began to heal. Fresh shoots emerged from broken stems. Wildflowers returned with vibrant color. The gardener's patience and acceptance nurtured this renewal. This story teaches us that suffering and disruption are part of life's cycle, offering opportunities for transformation and growth. When we meet hardship with openness rather than resistance, we create space for healing. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as the gardener, steady, patient, gentle, holding your own inner garden with care. Allow compassion to nourish the wounds and invite new life. In this nurturing, find the deep rest that comes from trusting the process of growth. May this story inspire you to embrace life's storms with kindness and patience, and to cultivate peace within your own heart. There was a young woman who carried her grief like a heavy cloak, feeling the weight in every step. One day, she sought the guidance of a wise elder known for her gentle heart. The elder invited her to sit by a quiet lake, its surface smooth and reflective. She said, "Grief is like this lake. Sometimes storms disturb its calm, but beneath the ripples lies stillness, always waiting." The woman listened, feeling the truth of these words resonate within. She learned to meet her sorrow not with resistance, but with gentle acceptance, allowing the waves to rise and fall without fear. This story teaches us that suffering is not a barrier to peace, but a passage through which peace emerges. When we hold our pain with compassion, we create space for healing and rest. As you breathe now, imagine the lake within you, sometimes restless, sometimes serene. Let compassion be the gentle hand that quiets the storm, revealing the deep stillness beneath. May this story inspire you to embrace your own waves of sorrow with kindness, and to discover the peace that follows. There once lived a monk known for his unwavering calm and gentle kindness. Travelers came from far and wide to sit with him, seeking relief from their suffering. One evening, a woman arrived, carrying the heavy grief of loss. She sat silently beside the monk, her tears flowing freely. Without words, the monk placed a hand on hers, offering presence without expectation. In that simple act, she felt held, not fixed or rushed, but deeply seen. This moment reveals the heart of compassion, not to solve or change, but to simply be there with another's pain. In such presence, healing begins. As you breathe now, imagine receiving this same kindness. Feel the warmth of gentle presence wrapping around your sorrows, softening the edges of your grief. Compassion invites us to rest deeply, not by escaping pain, but by meeting it with an open heart. May the story inspire you to offer and receive such kindness, finding peace amid life's challenges. A traveler once came upon a quiet temple, seeking answers to the restless ache within his heart. The monks there offered no quick fixes, no grand revelations, only an invitation to sit in stillness. As the days passed, the traveler learned to sit with his discomfort, to breathe deeply into the spaces where pain and uncertainty lived. He discovered that rest was not found by running away, but by staying present with kindness and patience. One evening, an elder said to him, "Compassion is the shelter where the weary heart finds rest. It does not demand perfection, only presence." This teaching reminds us that deep rest comes from embracing our full humanity, light and shadow, joy and sorrow, with gentle acceptance. As you breathe now, imagine yourself resting in this shelter of compassion. Let your heart open to itself with warmth and care. In this space, healing unfolds naturally, and peace begins to bloom. May this story inspire you to cultivate such compassionate rest in your own life, carrying kindness wherever you go. There once was a traveler who wandered through many lands, searching for a place to rest his weary heart. He encountered bustling cities and quiet villages, but the rest he sought always felt just beyond reach. One day, he came upon a small monastery nestled in the hills, where monks lived simply and moved with calm purpose. The traveler was invited to sit with them in silence, to breathe with the rising and falling of the earth. At first, his mind raced with worries and distractions. But slowly, as he learned to observe his thoughts without judgment, he discovered a gentle peace emerging from within. An elder monk explained, "True rest is not found by fleeing the world, but by resting fully in the present moment, embracing both joy and sorrow with an open heart." This story teaches us that deep rest arises when we meet life as it is, without resistance or avoidance. Compassion becomes the bridge that carries us through suffering to healing. As you breathe now, imagine yourself sitting quietly beside that traveler, feeling the peace that comes from stillness and acceptance. Allow your heart to soften, your mind to ease. In this space, may you find the rest you seek and the compassion that sustains you. A quiet village lay nestled between hills, where an old healer was known not for miraculous cures, but for her unwavering presence. One winter, a young man came to her, broken in body and spirit, seeking relief from pain that had lasted too long. The healer did not rush to fix him. Instead, she sat beside him, offering only her calm and steady heart. Day by day, her presence became a balm. The young man learned that healing often begins not with change, but with rest. Rest in the safety of compassionate companionship. Through this tender care, his body softened, his spirit lifted. This story reveals the power of presence, reminding us that sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is to simply be with another in their suffering, without judgment, without urgency. As you breathe now, imagine receiving such gentle presence. Feel the comfort that arises when you are held with kindness and patience. In this embrace, deep rest is found, not by escaping pain, but by welcoming it into the circle of compassion. May this story inspire you to offer yourself and others the healing power of presence and care. There once was a boy who lived in a small village, nestled between mountains and rivers. His heart was bright, yet he often saw the suffering around him. Neighbors grieving losses, friends struggling with illness. One day he found an injured bird on the ground, fragile and trembling. Without hesitation, he cradled the bird in his hands, offering warmth and comfort. Though he could not fix the wing, he stayed with the bird, sharing gentle words and quiet presence. This simple act reflected a profound truth. Compassion is not about solving every problem, but about being present with suffering, offering kindness without expectation. As you breathe now, imagine holding your own pain with the same tender care the boy showed the bird. Allow compassion to soften your heart, inviting rest and healing. In these moments of gentle presence, suffering becomes a teacher, guiding us toward empathy, connection, and peace. May this story inspire you to cultivate such compassionate presence in your own life, nurturing deep rest amid life's challenges. In a quiet forest monastery, a monk once told a story of a great storm that passed through the village below. Trees bent and broke, rivers overflowed, and homes were damaged. After the storm, the villagers gathered to assess the loss, lamenting what had been broken, but the monk pointed to a single tree that stood tall and unshaken. "This tree," he said, "does not resist the storm. It bends with the wind, rooted deeply in the earth. It teaches us that suffering, like the storm, is temporary. Our strength lies in our ability to remain grounded and open." This story reminds us that resilience is born from compassion for ourselves amid adversity. When we allow ourselves to bend rather than break, we find deep rest and healing. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as that tree, rooted, flexible, and open to life's storms. Feel the strength that comes from compassionate acceptance. In this embrace, suffering becomes a passage, not a prison. May this story inspire you to find peace in your own resilience. A wise teacher once shared a story about a candle in the darkness. She said, "The candle does not fight the darkness, it simply shines. The darkness has no power over the light, it only reveals it." This simple image reminds us that compassion is like the candle, an enduring light that can soften the harshness of suffering. When we bring gentle awareness and kindness to our own pain and to that of others, we illuminate the path to healing and rest. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as that candle. Feel your compassion glowing warmly, pushing back against fear and despair, offering comfort and hope. This light is not diminished by the darkness, but shines brightest because of it. In this way, suffering becomes a teacher, guiding us toward deeper understanding and peace. May this story inspire you to carry your light with courage and compassion, creating rest amid life's shadows. A monk once told a story about a river flowing gently through a valley. The river did not fight the rocks or the bends, but moved gracefully around them, carving a path over time. When storms came and the waters rose, the river did not resist but embraced the flood, knowing it was part of its journey. This story reminds us that suffering is like the river's flow, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, always changing. When we meet suffering with openness rather than resistance, we allow healing to emerge naturally. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as that river, moving through life's obstacles with ease and compassion. Feel the water's gentle strength within you, carrying you forward with grace. In this flow, we find deep rest, not by escaping hardship, but by embracing it as part of our path. May this story inspire you to cultivate patience and kindness within, navigating your own currents with peace. There was once a traveler who wandered through a dense forest, lost and weary. The path was unclear, shadows thick around him. Suddenly, he saw a small flame flickering in the distance, a lantern held by a kindly stranger. The stranger did not offer directions, but invited the traveler to walk together, sharing warmth and quiet companionship. As they moved through the darkness, the traveler felt his fear soften, replaced by a gentle calm. The light was not just the lantern but the presence beside him, steady and kind. This story teaches us that compassion is the light that guides us through our darkest moments. It reminds us that deep rest comes not from escaping suffering, but from walking alongside it with an open heart. As you breathe now, imagine the steady light within you, a compassionate presence guiding you gently through uncertainty. Let that light grow warm and bright. In this glow, may you find peace, courage, and the rest your heart longs for. There once was a monk who taught that suffering is like a flame. If you try to extinguish it by force, it only grows stronger. But if you hold it gently and watch with calm attention, the flame softens, its heat becomes bearable. The monk invited his students to practice this gentle holding, meeting pain not with resistance, but with compassionate presence. Through this practice, they discovered a deep rest beyond the grasp of suffering. As you breathe now, imagine holding your own pain as the monk holds the flame. With kindness and curiosity, feel the warmth of compassion easing the sting, allowing peace to arise. This story reminds us that suffering need not overwhelm us. Through gentle awareness, we create space for healing and rest. May this teaching inspire you to approach your struggles with patience and love, finding the light within every flame. There once was a man burdened by sorrow, wandering through a vast desert of loneliness and pain. One day, he came upon an oasis, where a gentle teacher offered him water and shade. The teacher said, "Your suffering is like this desert, vast and challenging. But within you lies an oasis of compassion and rest." The man drank deeply from this well of kindness, feeling the heavy weight lighten. He learned that suffering need not isolate us. When met with compassion, it becomes a bridge to connection and healing. This story reminds us that deep rest arises not from avoiding pain, but from embracing it with an open heart. Compassion is the water that nourishes our weary souls. As you breathe now, imagine yourself at that oasis, safe, refreshed, held by kindness. Let your heart open to the possibility of peace amid hardship. May this story inspire you to find your own oasis of compassion and rest in life's deserts. In a small village, there was a humble potter who shaped clay with great care and patience. Each piece he crafted was unique, reflecting the gentle touch and attention he gave. One day, a curious traveler asked him, "How do you remain so calm when the clay sometimes cracks or breaks?" The potter smiled and replied, "The cracks do not ruin the clay. They tell its story. I embrace imperfections as part of the beauty. Through patience and compassion, the clay becomes whole." This story reminds us that our own cracks and wounds are part of our journey. When met with kindness and acceptance, they become openings for healing and growth. As you breathe now, imagine holding your own imperfections with the potter's gentle hands. Feel compassion filling the spaces within, transforming brokenness into wholeness. In this embrace, deep rest emerges, a rest born not from perfection, but from acceptance and love. May this story inspire you to treat yourself with patience and kindness, discovering the beauty in your own unique journey. A young monk once asked his teacher how to find peace amid life's challenges. The teacher replied with a story. There was a bamboo grove, bending gracefully in the wind. When storms came, the bamboo did not resist but swayed, moving with the force rather than against it. Its flexibility kept it rooted and whole, even through the fiercest storms. The young monk learned that resilience comes from openness, from embracing life's hardships with compassion rather than resistance. When we soften towards suffering, we find a deep rest that is unshaken by turmoil. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as the bamboo, flexible, grounded, and open. Feel the strength that arises from compassionate acceptance, allowing you to flow with life's currents. This story invites us to meet our own storms with kindness and patience, discovering peace within the ever-changing flow of existence. May it inspire you to cultivate this gentle strength in your own heart. There was once a young woman who struggled with waves of fear that would rise and fall without warning. She sought help from a wise elder who invited her to sit quietly and breathe with the rhythm of the ocean. The elder said, "Fear is like the tide. It comes in waves, sometimes fierce, sometimes gentle. Trying to stop the tide only creates struggle. But if you learn to ride the waves with kindness and curiosity, you find balance." Through patient practice, the woman discovered she could meet her fear without being overwhelmed, riding each wave with growing confidence and compassion. This story teaches us that suffering is not a fixed state but a changing experience. When met with gentle awareness, it becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor. As you breathe now, imagine riding your own waves of emotion with the elder's kindness. Let compassion be your steady guide, offering rest amid the tides. May this story inspire you to find peace within the ebb and flow of your own journey. There was a monk who spoke of suffering not as a curse, but as a path that, when walked with care, leads to profound compassion. He told his disciples that the Buddha's teachings were like a lamp in the darkness, guiding those lost in pain toward understanding and peace. One day, a disciple asked, "How can suffering be a teacher when it causes so much pain?" The monk replied, "Suffering awakens the heart. It breaks the illusions of separation and invites us to connect deeply with ourselves and others. Through compassion, suffering becomes a doorway to wisdom and rest." This teaching reminds us that pain need not isolate us. When embraced with kindness, it opens us to empathy and healing. As you breathe now, imagine yourself walking this path with open eyes and a gentle heart, guided by the lamp of compassion. May this story inspire you to see suffering as a teacher, leading you to deeper rest and connection. There was once a gardener who tended a vast garden filled with flowers of every color. One spring, a fierce storm swept through, leaving many plants battered and broken. Instead of despairing, the gardener knelt among the ruins, gently tending each damaged bloom with care and patience. Over time, new shoots emerged, stronger and more vibrant than before. The gardener understood that storms, though difficult, were part of the cycle of growth. This story reminds us that suffering is often a catalyst for renewal. When met with compassion, it becomes a fertile ground for healing and transformation. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as the gardener, patient, kind, and steady, nurturing the wounded parts of your heart. Feel the gentle growth of compassion within you, offering rest and renewal. May this story inspire you to embrace life's storms with grace, finding peace in the garden of your own being. There was a young man who felt trapped by the weight of his own suffering, unable to see a way out. One day, he met an old teacher who told him, "Suffering is like a river that flows through us. You cannot stop the current, but you can learn to swim with it." The teacher taught him to breathe with the flow, to observe the waves of pain without being swept away. Through this practice, the young man discovered a new freedom, not from the absence of suffering, but from his changing relationship to it. This story invites us to meet our own pain with openness and compassion, allowing rest to arise even amid difficulty. As you breathe now, imagine yourself swimming gently in that river, feeling the support of the current and your own strength. May this story inspire you to embrace life's flows with kindness, finding peace within the movement. There was a quiet monk who once sat beneath a great tree, teaching that suffering is not a punishment, but a messenger. He explained that pain asks us to pay attention, to open our hearts more deeply. One day, a student asked, "How can suffering teach us compassion when it feels so unbearable?" The monk smiled gently. Suffering awakens the heart. When we meet our pain with kindness, we touch the shared human experience. Compassion grows not from ease, but from courage to face our own and others' suffering. This story teaches us that through embracing pain with gentle awareness, we find the path to healing and rest. As you breathe now, imagine your heart opening softly, welcoming both joy and sorrow with compassion. May this story inspire you to meet life's challenges with an open heart, discovering peace and deep rest within. There was once a gardener who tended a wild and untamed garden. Instead of forcing the plants into perfect order, she listened to their needs, offering water and care with patience. When storms came and branches broke, she did not despair. She understood that through hardship, new life would emerge stronger and more vibrant. This story teaches us that suffering is part of the natural cycle of growth. When we meet challenges with compassion and patience, we create space for healing and renewal. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as that gardener, tending to your own inner garden with kindness and care. Feel the gentle strength that arises from acceptance and nurturing. In this way, deep rest unfolds, not from avoiding pain, but from embracing it as a catalyst for transformation. May this story inspire you to cultivate compassion within, allowing your spirit to flourish even through hardship. There was a story of an old tree standing alone on a hilltop, weathering countless storms over the years. The villagers admired its strength and resilience, but often wondered how it could endure such harsh winds and heavy rains without breaking. One day, a traveler asked the tree itself. The tree whispered softly, "I do not resist the storm. I bend with the wind and let it pass through me. My roots hold me steady, and my branches remain open." This story teaches us that resilience does not come from rigidity, but from flexibility and openness. When we meet suffering with compassionate acceptance, we find strength and deep rest, even in the midst of life's storms. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as that tree, rooted, flexible, and open-hearted. Feel the calm that comes from embracing life fully, with all its challenges. May this story inspire you to cultivate such resilience and compassion within, finding peace and rest in every moment. There was a village where the people lived closely with nature, learning from its rhythms and cycles. Among them was an elder known for her wisdom and gentle heart. One day, a young person came to her, overwhelmed by the hardships of life and seeking comfort. The elder took the young one to a quiet stream and said, "See how the water flows freely, accepting stones and bends without struggle. It teaches us to move through life with openness and compassion, embracing what comes without resistance." This simple lesson reminds us that deep rest is found not in avoiding suffering, but in welcoming it with kindness and presence. As you breathe now, imagine yourself flowing like that stream, flexible, gentle, accepting. Let compassion wash over you, softening tension and opening space for peace. May the story inspire you to cultivate such openness, finding calm and rest in the ever-changing flow of life. A man once sought the counsel of a wise sage, burdened by the weight of suffering that seemed endless. The sage took him to a quiet place where wild flowers grew among the rocks. "See these flowers?" the sage said. "They bloom beautifully despite the harshness of their environment. Their secret is not resistance, but acceptance." The man pondered this, realizing that suffering, like the rocky soil, is part of life's landscape. When met with compassion and openness, it allows the heart to bloom. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as one of those wild flowers, resilient, gentle, thriving even amid difficulty. Let compassion nurture your growth and rest your spirit. May this story inspire you to embrace your own journey with kindness and courage, finding peace in the midst of life's challenges. There was once a traveler who walked through a dense forest, burdened by worries and pain. One day, she came upon a clearing where the sun shone warmly, illuminating a small pond. She sat by the water's edge and watched her reflection ripple with each gentle breeze. The traveler realized that her suffering was like the pond, sometimes calm, sometimes disturbed, but always reflecting the light above. She learned to breathe deeply and accept the waves within her, finding peace in the gentle stillness beneath. This story teaches us that suffering is a natural part of life's ebb and flow. When met with compassionate awareness, it leads us to rest and renewal. As you breathe now, imagine yourself sitting by that peaceful pond, embracing your feelings with kindness. Let the light of compassion calm your mind and soothe your heart. May this story inspire you to find stillness and rest within, no matter the storms around you. A young monk once wandered through a garden after a storm. The petals were scattered, branches broken, yet the air was thick with the scent of earth and renewal. He knelt beside a fallen blossom, noticing its delicate beauty despite the damage. The elder nearby said, "Even when life scatters us, we carry the seed of new beginnings within. Suffering breaks us open, allowing compassion and wisdom to grow." This story reminds us that from hardship arises opportunity, for healing, for growth, for rest. When we meet our pain with openness, we discover the resilience of the heart. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as that blossom, fragile yet strong, broken yet whole. Let compassion nurture your wounds, offering gentle rest and renewal. May this story inspire you to embrace your own journey with kindness, finding peace in every stage of growth. There was a fisherman who spent his days on a vast and unpredictable sea. Sometimes the waters were calm and the sun warm, other times fierce storms tossed his small boat. Yet, he never abandoned his journey. One day, a traveler asked, "How do you find peace amid such uncertainty?" The fisherman smiled and said, "I do not fight the waves. I adjust my sails and trust the currents, knowing that the sea's rhythm carries me forward." This story teaches us to meet life's suffering with flexibility and trust, allowing compassion to guide us through turbulent times. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as the fisherman, steady and adaptable, sailing through your own storms with kindness and courage. May this story inspire you to navigate life's challenges with a compassionate heart, discovering rest within the ever-changing tide. A humble potter once shared a lesson with his apprentices. He said, "When shaping clay, it is not only the smoothness that creates beauty, but also the imperfections, Each crack and curve tells a story of resilience and growth. The apprentices watched as he gently molded the clay, embracing its flaws and turning them into unique marks of character. This story reminds us that our suffering and imperfections are not flaws to hide, but gifts that shape our compassionate hearts. When met with kindness, they become sources of strength and deep rest. As you breathe now, imagine your own life's imperfections as the potter's clay, full of potential and beauty. Let compassion shape your experience, turning hardship into wisdom. May this story inspire you to accept yourself fully, finding peace and resilience in your unique journey. In a quiet village, a wise elder spoke of the heart's capacity for compassion. She said, "Compassion is like a wellspring, endlessly flowing when nourished by kindness and understanding. Even amid suffering, this wellspring offers deep rest and healing." One day, a young woman came to her, burdened by grief. The elder invited her to sit and breathe with the rhythm of the earth. "Your pain is real," she said, "but so is your ability to hold it gently." This story reminds us that compassion begins with embracing our own pain, allowing rest to arise not from escape, but from presence. As you breathe now, imagine your heart as that wellspring, steady, generous healing. Let compassion pour softly over your sorrows, bringing peace. May this story inspire you to cultivate such kindness within, discovering rest in every moment of life's unfolding. There was once a traveler who came upon a vast mountain range, its peaks shrouded in mist and mystery. Feeling small and uncertain, the traveler asked a wise guide, "How do I find the path through such daunting terrain?" The guide replied, "The journey is not about conquering the mountain, but about walking with awareness and compassion for yourself. Each step, no matter how small, brings you closer to peace." The traveler learned to walk gently, embracing the challenges as part of the journey rather than obstacles. Through patience and kindness, the path became clear. This story teaches us that suffering is not a barrier, but a part of the path toward deep rest and understanding. As you breathe now, imagine yourself on this mountain trail, moving with care and compassion. Let each breath ground you in presence and peace. May this story inspire you to embrace your journey with a gentle heart, finding rest in every step. A humble monk once sat by a river, watching the water flow endlessly. A curious disciple asked, "How can we find peace when life is always changing, like this river?" The monk smiled and said, "The river does not resist its journey. It embraces each turn and ripple with grace. In the same way, we find rest by accepting the flow of life, including its pain and joy." This story reminds us that peace is not the absence of suffering, but the presence of compassionate acceptance. When we open our hearts to life's currents, we discover deep rest and wisdom. As you breathe now, imagine yourself as that river, fluid, resilient, moving with kindness toward yourself and the world. May this story inspire you to embrace life's ever-changing nature with an open heart, finding peace in every moment. A weary traveler once reached a remote village nestled among misty hills, seeking a wise teacher known for her serenity and insight. When he finally found her, sitting quietly in a bamboo hut, he asked, "Master, I have searched everywhere for relief from my burdens. Why does suffering follow me like a shadow?" The teacher simply pointed to the teacup in her hand and said, "If you never set your burden down, even to drink tea, how can you hope to feel free?" Puzzled, the traveler sat in silence as she poured him tea. The warm aroma filled the air, calming his breath. She continued, "Suffering teaches us not only about pain, but about clinging. You cannot run from suffering, but you can sit beside it. Welcome it like an old guest. Let it teach you, then watch it leave on its own." He drank the tea, and for the first time in years, he felt a gentle space open within him, quiet, unburdened. It wasn't that his pain had disappeared, but he had stopped fighting it. There was stillness in his surrender. This moment, This kind of attention is what transforms suffering into something luminous. We begin to see that every difficult experience holds a hidden teaching, if we have the courage to listen closely. Imagine now a time in your life when you resisted pain. Perhaps it grew louder, more unbearable. And then remember a time you let go, softened, breathed through it. That's when the shift began, not outside of you, but deep within. That inner space of allowing becomes the gateway to rest. The teacher told the traveler one final thing: even the hardest sorrow is softened by compassion. First for yourself, then for others. When you feel lost, return to the breath, to kindness. That is the beginning and end of peace. So let this story settle in you like warm tea in your hands. Let it nourish the part of you that longs to be met, not fixed. The part of you that's tired of pretending it's not hard. Because it is hard. And that's okay, you are not alone. You never were. A young monk once asked his master, "Why do we meditate on suffering instead of turning away from it?" The master replied, "Because suffering is not the enemy. It is the doorway." In one of the oldest temples in northern Thailand, there lived a nun who had lost her entire family during a time of war. She came to the monastery to escape the chaos, to find some kind of peace. At first, she could barely speak without crying. Her breath was short, her posture tense. Yet every morning, she sat in silence with the others, facing her sorrow like a mountain sits with the wind. Months passed. The pain didn't vanish, but something changed. When asked about it, she said softly, "I stopped asking why it happened. I began to ask what it had come to teach me." That shift, subtle, profound, is the essence of compassion in practice. It is not resignation. It is attention without judgment. The capacity to witness one's own ache and remain present is one of the greatest expressions of strength in the Buddhist path. There's a parable that speaks to this beautifully. A farmer loses his only horse. The neighbors come to console him. "Such bad luck," they say. The farmer only replies, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returns, bringing with it 3 wild horses. The neighbors rejoice. "How fortunate." Again, the farmer says, "Maybe." Then, the farmer's son breaks his leg while trying to tame one of the wild horses. The neighbors once again offer sympathy. "Terrible misfortune," they say. Again, he replies, "Maybe." Days later, soldiers come to conscript young men for war, but his son is spared because of his injury. We don't know where our suffering leads, only that it opens paths we never would have chosen, yet which sometimes reveal a deeper wisdom. The nun eventually became a teacher herself. She often told her students, "What broke me open also taught me to love more fiercely." Don't wait for life to be easy. Let it be real. Let it soften you. She would pause then, letting the silence do the rest. And in that space, her students would feel something unexpected. Peace rising not from comfort, but from connection. That is the invitation of suffering, not to punish, but to reveal. Not to silence you, but to draw you closer to your own truth. Let this story rest within you. Let it find the cracks where light can come in. A single breath can change the entire direction of your day. Just one pause, just one moment of deliberate, gentle attention can interrupt the spiral of reactivity that so often pulls us away from what matters most. We think we need to fix everything immediately, to respond, to decide, to do. But sometimes what we actually need is to stop, breathe, and return. There's a practice known in some circles simply as the sacred pause. It's not complicated. It doesn't require incense or mantras or even a quiet room. All it asks is this: when you feel the rush of life carrying you into distraction, into stress, into fear or frustration, pause, just for a breath, just for a moment. Feel your feet on the floor, the air on your skin, the weight of your body being held by the earth. And then listen. What is true right now? Not what your mind is shouting, not the story it's spinning, but what is actually tangibly true in this living, breathing moment. That's the essence of mindfulness. It's not the absence of thought, but the willingness to return again and again to what is here. It's not about fixing yourself or becoming someone else. It's about learning to meet yourself exactly as you are, with compassion and without shame. This shift is so small, yet it carries immense power. The moment you soften into presence, the world begins to soften with you. One of the most respected teachers in the mindfulness tradition once described it this way: you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. Life will always rise and fall. We can't avoid pain, but we can learn how to hold it. We can learn how to remain steady amidst the swells. That steadiness doesn't come from clenching or resisting. It arises from surrender, from letting go of our desperate grasp on how things should be, and instead trusting ourselves to meet things as they are, to allow, to breathe, to respond with clarity instead of reacting from fear. The sacred pause is your access point, your doorway. Every time you take it, you're rewiring the patterns that keep you trapped in cycles of urgency, criticism, or self-doubt. You're building the inner muscle of resilience, of presence, of choice. You might forget, you might get swept away. That's okay. The path is not about perfection, it's about remembering. And each time you remember, that moment of return is not a failure. It is the practice itself. So the next time you find yourself overwhelmed, rushing, triggered, anxious, pause, breathe. Feel your breath like a friend arriving to comfort you. Notice that in this moment, you are safe, you are here, and you are capable of meeting this moment just as you are. Let the simplicity of that truth settle into your bones. There's something profoundly human about our need to feel heard, to feel that our experience matters, that someone somewhere is truly listening, not just to the words we say, but to the heart behind them. Listening in its truest form is an act of love. It's an offering, a quiet, sacred space where understanding can blossom. And yet, in our fast-paced world, it's becoming increasingly rare. Too often, we're not really listening, we're waiting to speak, or we're distracted, half present, nodding but not truly tuned in. We miss the subtle shifts in tone, the hesitation in someone's voice, the things left unsaid. And in doing so, we miss the opportunity to connect, to offer comfort, to simply be with another person in their truth. But real listening changes things. It slows time. It tells the other person, you're not alone. I'm here. I'm with you. It requires patience, yes, but also presence, and a willingness to let go of the urge to fix, to advise, or to steer the conversation. Sometimes the most healing words are not words at all, but silence held with compassion. Think about a time someone really listened to you, not just nodded politely, but gave you their full attention. Their eyes didn't wander, their body was still, their mind wasn't somewhere else, planning their response or checking their phone. They just stayed with you. Do you remember how that felt? When we listen this way, we offer more than our ears. We offer a sanctuary, a place where someone can unfold, cry if they need to, laugh freely, speak their fears without being judged. And often, that act of being witnessed is what unlocks the wisdom or relief they were searching for all along. Now, this doesn't mean you always have to have hours to spare or say all the perfect things, but it does mean practicing presence, putting down your phone, making eye contact, giving little nods of encouragement, asking questions that come from curiosity, not obligation, and perhaps most importantly, allowing space for silence. It can feel awkward, sure. We're so used to filling every pause. But in that stillness, something incredible happens. The other person has room to breathe, to discover, to speak from a deeper place. And you, as the listener, begin to sense things that words alone can't convey. This kind of listening also applies to ourselves. Are you listening to your body? To the small signals it sends, fatigue, tension, the flutter of anxiety in your stomach? Are you listening to your heart when it whispers that something isn't quite right, or that it longs for something more? Often we override these messages because life is noisy, responsibilities press in, expectations cloud our inner clarity. But what would it mean to pause and truly listen, not just with your ears, but with your whole being, to hear your own needs, your own truth, your own quiet wisdom rising from within? When we practice deep listening, whether toward another person or ourselves, we're choosing connection over control, curiosity over certainty, compassion over judgment, and in doing so, we cultivate relationships that are not only more authentic, but more resilient. So, next time someone speaks to you, try this: slow down, turn toward them, let your attention soften, let go of the need to be right or clever or even helpful. Just be there, listen, not only to their words, but to what their heart might be trying to say. And maybe in the stillness that follows, you'll both find something unexpected, something tender, something healing, something true. Sometimes the people around us carry invisible burdens, stories they've never told, wounds they've never named, griefs they've folded tightly inside themselves for years. And while we might not always see these things, when we practice deep listening, we begin to sense them. We start to notice the tremble in someone's voice, the glance that lingers just a moment too long, the way they pause before answering a simple question. These are not just quirks of speech or habit, they're clues, small windows into the soul. When we choose to truly listen, we create space for what's hidden to slowly emerge. We become a refuge where the stories of others can unfold at their own pace, without pressure, without judgment. In that space, healing begins, not because we offer solutions, but because we offer presence. And presence, steady and kind, can be more powerful than any advice. Now, this type of listening is not always easy. It takes courage to sit with someone's pain without trying to escape it. It takes restraint not to rush in with our own experiences or insights. It takes humility to accept that sometimes the best thing we can offer is simply our quiet, attentive being. There's a story from the Buddhist tradition that tells of a monk who became deeply disturbed by the suffering he saw in the world. Every day, people came to him with their sorrows, stories of illness, loss, fear, regret. At first, he tried to help them with teachings, with practices, with logic. But over time, he saw that what they needed more than anything was simply someone to listen. So he began to do just that. He sat with them, held their hands, let them cry. And in his listening, something shifted, not just for those who came to him, but within himself. He began to see that suffering is not a problem to be solved, but a presence to be honored, that it doesn't always need fixing, only witnessing. And through that witnessing, he found that both pain and compassion could coexist in the same breath, in the same silence. You might recall a time when you were in pain and someone just sat with you, said little, maybe nothing, but you felt seen. That kind of moment can linger for years, not because of what was said, but because of how present the person was. Their stillness said, "I'm not afraid of your sadness. I'm not leaving." And sometimes, that's all we need to begin to heal. In our daily lives, we have the opportunity to offer this kind of presence, not just in moments of deep sorrow, but in ordinary conversation, a child sharing a worry, a friend venting after a hard day, a coworker quietly overwhelmed. Each of these moments is a chance to say, without words, "You matter, I hear you." Of course, we won't always get it right. Sometimes we'll get distracted. Sometimes we'll respond too quickly or miss the deeper meaning. That's okay. The point is not perfection, it's intention. It's choosing to come back, again and again, to the practice of listening with the whole heart. Listening can also be a form of meditation. As you listen deeply, you begin to notice your own inner dialogue, the urge to judge, to compare, to fix. You can let those thoughts pass like clouds in the sky, returning gently to the speaker. In doing so, you not only offer them your attention, you train yourself in compassion, in mindfulness, in humility. And when no one else is around, you can offer this same gift to yourself. You can sit quietly and ask, what is it I'm feeling right now? And then simply listen, without analyzing, without suppressing, without turning away. Let whatever comes be there, like a friend you're learning to understand. In this way, deep listening becomes more than a skill. It becomes a way of living, a way of being with others and with yourself that says you don't have to carry this alone. I'm here, I'm listening. There's a subtle, almost magical power in simply slowing down. In a world that seems to demand speed at every turn, faster responses, quicker results, instant gratification, there's something quietly radical about choosing stillness, choosing to pause, to breathe, to allow the moment to unfold without rushing it along. And in that pause, something changes, something opens. We begin to see things not just more clearly, but more fully, with presence, with care. Think about the last time you truly slowed down, not just physically, but mentally. Maybe it was while watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky streaked with soft color, or standing at the edge of the sea, the waves rolling in their timeless rhythm. In those moments, life doesn't feel like something to conquer. It feels like something to be part of, to witness, to join in with grace and humility. This kind of slowing isn't laziness, it's attention, it's respect for the life within and around us. And it's where clarity often begins, because when we're rushing, we tend to miss the finer details, the nuance in someone's voice, the subtle shift in our own emotions, the way the light catches on a familiar face. But when we slow down, those details return to us. They remind us of what matters. Slowing down also invites us to reconnect with rhythm, our natural rhythm, not the one imposed by alarms and notifications, the rhythm of breath, of heartbeat, of nature. And in that rhythm, we find balance. We remember that life doesn't have to be a sprint. It can be a series of deeply intentional steps. Even in conversation, slowing down has its own quiet rewards. We listen more deeply. We speak more thoughtfully. We allow pauses without rushing to fill them. And in that space, truth can surface, often gently, often unexpectedly. Because silence, when honored, becomes fertile ground for insight. There's a practice some people use called sacred pauses. It's the simple act of taking a few deep breaths before responding or before beginning a task. Just a breath or two, and in that space you gather yourself, you ground yourself, and you remind your body we're not in danger. We don't have to rush. Those small acts of slowing can ripple through an entire day, changing the tone of everything that follows. In creative work too, slowing down is often where the magic happens. Ideas don't always arrive on command. They need room. They need silence. They need the gentle pressure of time to take shape. When you rush the process, you might finish something quickly, but you may miss the deeper beauty that would have come if you'd let it unfold at its own pace. In relationships, slowing down means really being with someone, not multitasking while they talk, not thinking about what you'll say next, just being there, fully. And people notice, they feel it, because deep down, we all want to be met with that kind of presence, that kind of care. Slowing down can also mean letting go of urgency that's not truly ours. The world will always have another deadline, another demand, another reason to hurry. But we get to choose how we respond. We get to ask, is this pace serving me? Is it aligned with my values, with what I want to cultivate in this moment? That kind of awareness is liberating. It gives us the power to live not by momentum, but by intention. So as you move forward, consider where in your life you might welcome a little more slowness, not as a retreat, but as a deepening, a way of returning to what's real. Whether it's walking more mindfully, speaking more thoughtfully, or just taking an extra minute to notice the world around you. These are not small things, they're sacred ones, because in the stillness, in the spaces between, we often find what we didn't even know we were missing. A sense of home within ourselves, a quiet kind of joy, a rhythm that is entirely, beautifully our own. Here's the next section of the narration, continuing with the tone and structure you specified, and hitting the required word count exactly. There's something profoundly human about the way we seek meaning, how we look at the world and ask, what does this mean for me? What's the deeper thread? It's in our nature to search, to reflect, to gather moments and weave them into something lasting. And often, we do this not with grand declarations, but through quiet realizations that build over time. The slow unfolding of awareness that something has shifted, that a new understanding has taken root. Think about the way certain memories stay with you. Not always the loud ones, not always the big celebrations or dramatic turning points, but those smaller, almost invisible moments. The way someone looked at you when they didn't have to say a word. The comfort of a familiar scent in an unfamiliar place. The relief of laughter shared in the middle of a difficult day. These are the things that stay, that echo quietly through us. And meaning isn't always found in clarity. Sometimes it's in the mystery, in letting go of the need to label everything or to explain it perfectly, in trusting that a feeling, a connection, an experience, those can be complete in themselves. They don't have to be fully understood to be fully real. There's a kind of grace in that acceptance, a quiet confidence that life doesn't owe us certainty in order to offer richness. So often, the most profound meaning comes not from what happens to us, but from how we meet it, how we carry it forward, how we choose to respond, even when things feel uncertain or overwhelming. That's where the real transformation lies, not in the circumstances themselves, but in the presence we bring to them. And presence doesn't require perfection. It just requires willingness. A willingness to show up, to stay open, to be affected, to not always know the answer, but to keep listening anyway, to notice the nuances, the shifts in energy, the invitations tucked inside the ordinary. Because the truth is, meaning hides in plain sight. It's there in the pauses, in the textures of everyday life, waiting for us to notice. Sometimes we find meaning in creating, in making something from nothing. Whether it's a piece of art, a garden, a shared meal, or simply a well-chosen word, there's something powerful in saying, this came from me. This came through me. That act of shaping the rawness of life into something coherent, something beautiful, that's meaning made manifest. That's storytelling at its core. Other times we find meaning in connection, in the way our lives touch and influence one another. A brief exchange with a stranger that leaves a lasting impression. The comfort of knowing someone sees you, hears you, and still chooses to stay. The courage it takes to say, I'm here with you, even when the path is unclear. In these bonds, in these shared journeys, something deeply meaningful is born. And occasionally, meaning finds us in silence, in solitude, when we're stripped of distractions and simply left with ourselves. It's there that the deeper questions rise, the ones that don't always have answers, but ask to be honored anyway. Who am I when no one's watching? What do I long for when everything else is quiet? These are not easy questions, but they're sacred. They mark the beginning of a deeper kind of knowing. So maybe meaning isn't something we chase. Maybe it's something we allow, something we notice when we slow down enough to pay attention. When we resist the urge to rush past what feels uncomfortable and instead lean into it with tenderness. When we let our lives speak, even in whispers, and we choose to listen. And over time, these moments of meaning, these small, steady recognitions, begin to form a kind of compass. Not a rigid map, but a felt sense of direction, a way of knowing when we're aligned with our truest values and when we're drifting from them. It doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be honest, because ultimately, the most meaningful life isn't necessarily the one with the most acclaim, the most accomplishments, or the most visible milestones. It's the life lived with depth, with attention, with intention. A life that reflects who we really are, not just what we've done. A life that feels, at the end of the day, like it mattered, even in small ways, especially in small ways, certainly. There's a quiet power in simply showing up, in being present without needing to fix, control, or predict. Often, that's where the most profound meaning begins, not in the dramatic moments, but in the ordinary ones we fully inhabit. To walk through the day with awareness is to begin to see the subtle textures of life, the way the morning light touches a windowsill, the hush of a shared glance, the rhythm of your own breath when the world feels still. Each one of these is a doorway into something deeper, and sometimes we arrive at meaning through difficulty, through the kind of challenges that test us, stretch us, change us. These are the crucibles in which clarity is forged, not always immediately, but over time. You may not understand why something is happening while you're in the middle of it. That's okay. Understanding isn't always the first gift. Sometimes, it's simply the resilience to keep going. The meaning reveals itself later, when the dust settles and the heart has had time to listen. Grief, for example, can become a teacher. It reminds us of love, of how deeply we've cared, of what mattered enough to hurt. That ache, while painful, is also evidence of connection, of investment in the world and in each other. Meaning isn't found in bypassing the grief, but in allowing it to move through us, to soften the walls we build around our hearts. We emerge more human, more attuned, more capable of compassion. And joy, real joy, is meaningful precisely because it's rooted in authenticity. It's not performative, not about appearances. It's that sudden swell of lightness when something just feels right, when a laugh rises unbidden, when you recognize yourself in someone else's story, when your whole being says yes. These moments remind us we're alive, not just existing. And that too is meaning. It can help to remember that meaning doesn't always look profound from the outside. Sometimes it's in the choice to rest instead of hustle, to listen instead of speak, to forgive even if the world says you shouldn't. These moments may go unnoticed by others, but they can shift something essential inside you. They're acts of quiet integrity, and over time, they become the thread that holds your story together. Even the most seemingly mundane routines can carry meaning when approached with attention. The way you make your tea in the morning, the care you take in tidying a space, the rhythm of a daily walk. These actions become rituals when we imbue them with purpose, when we remember that how we do anything is how we do everything. When we say to ourselves, this matters because I'm in it, because I'm bringing myself fully here. And that's the heart of it, really. Presence, the willingness to be with life as it is, with openness and curiosity. When we stop trying to mold every experience into a specific shape and instead let it unfold, we often find that meaning was there all along, just waiting for us to notice. As we reflect on this journey, we begin to understand that meaning isn't a destination, it's a practice, a way of being in the world. It grows when we pay attention, when we stay soft, when we allow life to touch us. It's not something you earn or achieve. It's something you uncover, layer by layer, as you walk your path with honesty and care. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. Your way of moving through the world becomes a quiet offering, a kind of testimony. I was here. I chose to feel. I chose to notice. I chose to love. And maybe that's the most meaningful thing of all. Of course, there is a gentle truth often spoken in Buddhist teachings: impermanence. The understanding that everything changes, Nothing stays the same. At first glance, this may seem like a cause for sorrow, but when you lean into it, really feel it in your bones, it becomes liberating. If nothing is permanent, then suffering too must pass, and joy too teaches us to cherish what we have while it is here. In this way, impermanence becomes not just a concept, but a gateway to presence, to reverence for what is unfolding now. Imagine a leaf falling. It drifts from the branch in no rush, carried by the wind. It does not resist its path. In its falling, there is grace. This is the image many teachers use to describe the art of letting go. Letting go is not a loss. It is an arrival into what is. When we release the need to control, to cling to what was or might be, we find peace in the space that remains. And that space is often filled with compassion, clarity, and quiet understanding. There was once a monk who carried a bowl of water to reflect on the mind. "See how still it is," he'd say. "When undisturbed, it reflects the world clearly. But when agitated, when stirred, the reflection becomes distorted. Our minds too, when stirred by desire, fear, or anger, lose clarity. We cannot see things as they are. But when we sit quietly, breathe, and allow the sediment to settle, the water clears. We see not just what is outside, but who we are within. This simplicity is not emptiness, but richness. It's in the breath, in the quiet footsteps on a forest path, in the soft gaze we offer to another. These moments, simple, fleeting, are often where insight lives. They don't scream for attention, but whisper truths that only stillness can hear. You begin to realize that enlightenment is not some distant peak to scale, but a deepening into now, a homecoming to yourself as you are. Suffering in this view becomes a teacher not to be feared, but to be listened to. It invites us inward. It asks, where have you abandoned yourself? What needs tenderness? What are you ready to release? These questions, when asked gently, open us. And in the opening, we often find not just pain, but softness and the potential for great love. Think of how the lotus grows. From the murkiest waters, it rises toward the light. Its beauty is not in spite of the mud, but because of it. The mud is what feeds it, what anchors it. Without the mud, there would be no lotus. So it is with our suffering. The most beautiful qualities, compassion, patience, wisdom, they bloom from the soil of our challenges. From facing what is difficult and meeting it with kindness. Kindness to the self is often the first step, and also the hardest. We're quick to offer it to others, slower to extend it inward. But every moment we soften toward ourselves, we create a space where healing can take root. This may look like forgiving a past version of you, or simply resting without justification, or saying, "This hurts," without rushing to fix it. These are not small things. They are brave acts of compassion. As you walk the path of awareness, you begin to recognize that there is no need to rush. The journey itself is the practice. Each step, each breath, each moment of noticing is enough. You don't have to do more, be more, achieve some perfect state. You are already whole. The practice is just remembering that truth again and again. So tonight, or whenever you find stillness, return to the breath, not as a task, but as a friend. Let it guide you back to your center. Let it remind you that you are alive here now. And in that space, allow yourself to rest, not as a break from the path, but as part of it. Deep rest is sacred. It restores what suffering has worn down. It softens what has become hardened. It brings you back to yourself. There's something deeply human about our desire to seek meaning. We search for it in the stars, in the patterns of our days, in the quiet between conversations. And sometimes we find it not in big answers, but in gentle questions. Questions like, what matters most to me in this moment? Or, what would love do now? These are not questions to be solved like riddles, but held like lanterns, illuminating the path ahead just far enough for the next step. Imagine standing beside a calm ocean, watching the waves gently reach the shore. Each wave is different, but the ocean remains. Our thoughts, emotions, and experiences are like those waves, temporary, always shifting. But the awareness beneath it all, that's the ocean, always present, always capable of holding everything. This is the heart of mindfulness. It's not about stopping the waves, but learning to surf them with grace, with presence, with compassion. When we bring mindful awareness to everyday tasks, something beautiful happens. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. Washing a dish becomes an act of care. Folding laundry transforms into a meditation on gratitude. Walking becomes a dance with gravity and breath. We don't have to escape to monasteries or mountaintops to find clarity. Sometimes it's waiting in the next sip of tea or the warmth of sunlight on your skin. It's about being fully where you are, not wishing for something else. There's a great tenderness in accepting what is. It doesn't mean resignation. It means allowing life to be as it is and choosing how to meet it with intention. Maybe the day hasn't gone how you planned. Maybe things feel heavy. That's okay. Sit with that. Feel it. Let it be a visitor, not a permanent resident. And when you're ready, choose your next breath with care. That's all it takes to begin again. Beginning again is a sacred practice. It means we always have a doorway back to ourselves, no matter how far we've wandered. It's the gentle voice that says, you can try again. You can be here now. You can start fresh. And every time we return to this moment, we build resilience. We become a little softer, a little stronger, and a little more awake. Think of the seasons, how they turn without resistance. Spring doesn't cling to winter, and summer doesn't try to avoid the fall. Each season honors its time, so too can we honor the seasons of our lives. The joyful times, the grieving times, the quiet pauses, the surges of creativity. They're all part of the whole, none better or worse, just different expressions of what it means to be alive. There's a Japanese concept called wabi-sabi, which finds beauty in imperfection and impermanence. A cracked bowl isn't discarded, it's mended with gold, its flaws highlighted as part of its story. In many ways, that's what we're invited to do in life, to stop hiding our cracks, and instead recognize them as the places where the light gets in, where growth happened, where healing began. When you listen deeply, really deeply, to the moment in front of you, you begin to hear your own wisdom emerging, not from books or gurus, but from within. A quiet knowing that's always been there, waiting for stillness to speak. It might say, rest here, or be kind to yourself, or even let go. And when you trust that voice, something shifts. You start to live in alignment with your own truth, not the expectations of the world. This kind of living is slow but full. It doesn't rush, it doesn't strive endlessly. It simply unfolds, like a flower opening to the sun, like a melody finding its rhythm, like you coming home to yourself over and over again. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin in stillness, not in doing, but in being. In the silence between our thoughts, in the gentle awareness that follows each breath, we reconnect with something ancient, something tender and enduring. This presence does not demand anything from us. It welcomes us just as we are, with our doubts, our hopes, our weariness, our longing. It says, you are already whole. You are already enough. Imagine a candle flickering in the darkness, not trying to banish the dark, but simply shining. That's what your awareness is like. It doesn't need to fix everything or understand everything. Its job is simply to be here, faithfully illuminating whatever arises. Joy or sorrow, clarity or confusion, love or fear. And through this gentle illumination, healing begins. You don't have to force it. You only have to stay close to your experience with kindness. When we open our hearts to our own suffering, we discover something unexpected, a reservoir of compassion, not only for ourselves, but for others. We begin to see that everyone is carrying something. Everyone has felt loss. Everyone has known fear. and this recognition softens us. It dissolves the illusion of separateness. We are not alone. We are part of a vast, interconnected web of feeling and experience and aliveness. And so, from this place of softness, we can ask, how can I bring more gentleness to this moment? How can I hold my thoughts more lightly, meet my pain with care, offer my presence as a gift? Sometimes, the answer is simply to listen to the rhythm of our breath, to the needs of our body, to the quiet voice within that always knows the next step. And sometimes, that step is rest. True rest is not just the absence of activity, it's the presence of peace. It's the letting go of striving, the exhale after a long effort, the return to the simple fact of being. In Buddhist tradition, rest is sacred. It is a form of wisdom. It reminds us that doing more is not always better. That peace is not earned, it's remembered. And it is in this remembering that we begin to feel whole again. In the story of the Buddha's awakening, there's a moment often overlooked. After years of self-denial and intense spiritual practice, Siddhartha sat beneath the Bodhi tree and simply allowed everything to be. No more effort, no more control, just presence. And in that presence something opened, insight dawned, liberation arose, not from pushing but from yielding, not from force, but from surrender. What if you too could rest in this moment as it is, without needing it to be different? What if you trusted that you don't have to have it all figured out, that your worth is not measured by your productivity or your perfection, but by your very being? That's the invitation here, not to become someone else, but to return to who you already are beneath the layers of judgment and striving and fear. And who you are is deeply worthy of love, of care, of spaciousness. You are a living expression of this very moment, breathing, sensing, feeling. You belong here in this unfolding. There is nothing you need to do to earn that belonging. Just breathe. Just be. Now as we begin to bring this journey to a close, let us hold all that we've touched, not with grasping, but with reverence. The stories we've heard, the wisdom we've remembered, the stillness we've tasted. Let them echo gently in your heart like a bell after it's rung, subtle, lingering, alive. And may you carry this sense of presence with you into the rhythms of your life, into the moments of quiet and chaos, of joy and sorrow, of connection and solitude. May you meet yourself again and again with tenderness, knowing that in every breath, a new beginning awaits.